Chapter 416. Mr. Mei looked at Shangguan Li from afar and sighed. Now do you know the benefits of having someone by your side? Shangguan Li's body was still trembling slightly. She said lightly, "That's all there is to it." Mr. Mei shook his head. "You're already so cold, yet you're still so stubborn. Girl, come, let me hug you and warm you up." Although the astral winds were bone-chilling with Wan Wan and Xiao Bai's blanket, it was warm to the heart. It was so warm that it was a little depraved. When he thought about how Li Qing was cultivating in seclusion while he was here, enjoying Wan Wan and Xiao Bai warming his bed, Li Mu felt that he was really too depraved. After some self-reflection, he felt that he could not go on like this. He pulled his arms out of Wan Wan and Xiao Bai's embrace, sat cross-legged on the bed, and continued to comprehend the heavenly book. At this time, after many days of fermenting, the news of the Demon Emperor Baidi's cave abode had finally spread. The 6 Taoist sects, the 4 demonic sects, the Demon Kings, and even the Great Zhou court had all participated in the fight for the Demon Emperor's cave abode. Although most people did not know the final result, one could imagine that with so many factions and countless experts, there was only one heavenly book and one Baidi's inheritance. No matter who obtained it in the end, there would definitely be an extremely fierce fight. During this period of time, the actions of the various large forces all proved this point. Within the Demon Nation, the Bear Tribe, the Snake Tribe, the Wolf Tribe, and the Leopard Tribe suddenly formed an alliance. Before this, there were many conflicts between the various Demon Kings because of territorial disputes, and there were no signs of an alliance. After the 4 Demon Kings formed an alliance, some news also spread within their Demon Nation. It was said that in the fight for the Demon Emperor's cave, the 4 Demon Kings had suffered heavy losses. The demon generals that they had sent out were almost completely annihilated. In order to avoid being swallowed up by the other Demon Kings after their strength was greatly damaged, they had no choice but to form an alliance. As for the Demon Dao demon sect in the Demon Nation, they had always been arrogant and had constantly swallowed up the surrounding small demon tribes to expand their own forces. However, in recent days, they had suddenly become much more well-behaved. Not only had their forces shrunk, but the demons that used to rely on the demon sect as their backing had also become terrified. This also confirmed some of the rumors that had spread from the territories of the Bear King and the Snake King. It was said that the demon sect had sent 5 5th-level demon generals into the White Emperor cave, but none of them had returned. The demon sect head elder had lost half of his capable subordinates. It was no wonder that the demon sect had suddenly become obedient. At the same time, in the faraway Yuta Ghost region, Soul Sect, the 2 soul shadows stood in Soul Palace and looked at each other. 2 years ago, the Soul Sect had a 6th-level Great Elder, and below him were the 10 Kings of Hell. Each of their cultivations were above the 5th level. Since Chu Jiang of Gojoseon had died in the North County, King Wuguan, Emperor Song, and the Great Elder Nether Saint had all died in the hands of Li Mu. The Soul Sect's strength had been greatly damaged. In this fight for the Demon Emperor's cave, King Qingguang had sent out 5 Kings of Hell. In the end, not a single one of the 5 Kings of Hell had returned. The once glorious Soul Sect had countless experts. Now, only King Qingguang, who had been forcefully raised to the 6th level, and the King of Chakravarti of the 10 Kings of Hell were left. They had completely fallen to the bottom of the 10 sects. If other forces in the Ghost region had encountered such a setback, the surrounding Ghost Kings who were eyeing them covetously would have been unable to sit still. The only outcome for them was to be swallowed up and divided up. However, no matter how weak the Soul Sect was, it was still one of the 10 sects of the Demon Dao. With the giant tree of the Demon Dao behind them, no forces in the Ghost region dared to swallow them up. The main reason was that they themselves could not accept the decline of the Soul Sect. King Qingguang said in a deep voice, "We must recruit some experts as soon as possible. Otherwise, the Soul Sect will only exist in name." The King of Chakravarti shook his head. The 5th-level spirits of the Ghost region have already been absorbed by various forces. We can't snatch them from them. The major forces in the Ghost region did not dare to touch the Soul Sect because they were afraid of the Demon Dao. However, if the Soul Sect came knocking on their door, they would not be polite. With the Soul Sect's current strength, they could not afford to offend anyone. King Qingguang said, "Not all the spirits have joined the major forces. I heard that there is a female spirit in the West Mountain who has just become a spirit. A year ago, the east of the May Mountain was also occupied by a 5th-level soul cultivator. The king of Chakravarti thought for a while and said, Great Elder said that Madame Lin of the West Mountain and the powerful existence of the May Mountain. King Qingguang said, It's them. The king of Chakravarti shook his head. Half a year ago, King Taishan was ordered by the saint to invite Madame Lin, but she rejected him. The one in the May Mountain is extremely powerful. King Pingdang and I went to invite her, but we did not even get to see her face. King Pingdang was almost killed by her because he spoke rudely. If I did not mention the name of the saint at the critical moment, the two of us would not have made it back. King Qingguang frowned and asked, The two of you almost died before you even got to see her face. Could it be that the soul cultivator has already reached the 6th level? No. The king of Chakravarti said. Her cultivation is not much stronger than ours, but her remarkable ability is really terrifying. It is simply unheard of, King Qingguang asked. What kind of remarkable ability? The king of Chakravarti said. She can make snow fall in a 10-mile radius. The snow is bone-chilling and can harm souls. She can also control lightning, which is very effective against us. King Qingguang's eyes flashed as he said, She does have some ability. If I can subdue her, wouldn't I have another helper by my side? I definitely can't let this girl go. However, before subduing her, I need to go meet Madame Lin. As soon as he finished speaking, his body turned into a cloud of gray mist and left the Hall of Souls, flying towards the west. At the same time, a certain matter caused a stir in the demonic path. The reward for the second arrest of Li Mu by the Lord of Illusions was even more generous than the first. Anyone who could capture this person alive would become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions and wield the heavenly tomes for a year. After all, the previous reward for Li Mu was only to guide his cultivation and help him comprehend the heavenly tomes once. To become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions and be given a year to comprehend the heavenly tomes. This was not a recruitment of a disciple, but a recruitment of a son-in-law. This benefit did not seem like it was for an outsider. Everyone knew that the Lord of Illusions had a beautiful and talented daughter. If one could become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions, there was a high chance, no, a 90% chance, that one could marry the Lord of Illusions and become a family with the Lord of Illusions. As soon as this news spread, it caused a heated discussion in the demonic path. What did that Li Mu do to make the Lord of Illusions put a bounty on him? This is the second time he has put a bounty on him. Did he sleep with the Lord of Illusions' daughter? The Lord of Illusions loves Princess Illusions very much. I think it's possible. No, I must kill Li Mu. It's not to become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions, or to comprehend the heavenly tomes. The main thing is that I can't tolerate him sullying Princess Illusions. Forget it. The Lord of Illusions said that he only wants him alive. Why is it so much harder to capture him alive than dead? The Lord of Illusions' bounty for Li Mu was not only limited to the demonic path. No matter if it was the demon race, ghost race, or human race, as long as they could bring Li Mu to him alive, they would be rewarded by the Lord of Illusions. As for why the Lord of Illusions only wanted him alive, everyone speculated. In the end, they all agreed that it was because Li Mu had abandoned Princess Illusions and angered the Lord of Illusions. The Lord of Illusions must have planned to use extremely cruel methods to torture him after capturing him alive. In the Changle Palace, Zhou Yi was holding a secret report from the demon sect. He looked at Li Mu and said with interest, "The spies from the demon sect said that you made the Lord of Illusions' daughter pregnant. The Lord of Illusions has put a bounty on you in the Zoo continent. The person who captures you alive will become his personal disciple, and will have 1 year to comprehend a page of the heavenly tomes. When did the thing between you and that fox happen?" Wanwan was so shocked that her mouth was wide open. She didn't even realize that the candy in her hand had fallen out. Xiaobai was in a daze. Thinking that her benefactor already had another fox outside, she suddenly felt that her life was bleak. Could it be that her benefactor's love for her would disappear? Chapter 417. A bunch of nonsense. After Li Mu reacted, his face revealed a look of anger as he said, Who sent back this false information? That person is not responsible at all. It's fine if it's just a fabricated rumor, but if this is an important battle report, how many things will be delayed and how much damage will be caused to the imperial court? His bonus for this year is gone. Zhou put down the report and lightly said, "This matter has already spread throughout the entire demonic path. Anyone can find out about it." Li Mu raised his head to look at her and said, "Your Majesty, please believe this subject. This subject is loyal to my wife and is not." No matter how thick-skinned Li Mu was, he could not say the word loyal. He could not even say promiscuous. Otherwise, where would he place Li Qing, Little White, and Wanwan? He lightly coughed and said, "This subject is loyal to your Majesty. How can I have an affair with the demonic path witch? It's even more impossible to impregnate her. This is a rumor, a scandal. This subject has Little White by his side. How can I provoke other foxes?" Little White's face revealed a bashful expression. She felt that her benefactor's love for her had returned. Zhou flicked her finger and a flame flew out, burning the report to ashes. She said, all right. This emperor believes you. Go back to work." Li Mu walked out of Chang'e Palace and slowly exhaled. This heavenly lord of 10,000 illusions was truly endless. Not to mention the demonic path people. Even Li Mu himself was moved by the bounty this time. Li Mu was not interested in becoming the direct disciple of the myriad illusion heaven monarch, or marrying Phantasmagoria. However, Li Mu was very curious about the page of the heavenly book in the myriad illusion heaven monarch's hands. It was said that the complete heavenly book had a total of 24 pages. It contained the great Tao of heaven and earth. Li Mu had comprehended 2 of the pages, and obtained the inheritance of the talisman Tao and the demonic Tao. At the same time, the images left behind in the heavenly book also left a deep impression on Li Mu. What were those giant beasts? Why did the demonic cultivators bang their heads against the sky? What other mysteries were there in the other heavenly books? As the most legendary treasure in the world, there were too many legends about the heavenly book. However, without a doubt, once one comprehended the complete heavenly book, one would be able to see the great Tao of this world, and uncover the mysteries of the ancient times. These 2 things attracted Li Mu much more than Phantasmagoria. He wondered if the heaven monarch of myriad illusions would keep his promise, and allow him to comprehend the page of the heavenly book in his hands if he surrendered himself, and brought Li Mu back alive. Li Mu thought about it carefully and felt that this possibility was not big, so he completely dispelled this idea. 100,000 Great Mountains, where the Mirage faction was located. The myriad illusions lord handed a simple page to Phantasmagoria and said, "If you can't comprehend more, then don't force yourself." Phantasmagoria nodded and said, "I understand." She took the page and sank her consciousness into it. Soon, she appeared in an empty space. This space was filled with a boundless fog. She could only see a few steps away from her. The fog would occasionally tumble, as if something was flying past at high speed. Phantasmagoria calmed her heart and focused her mind. She tried to use her mind to disperse the fog. The fog in front of her seemed to have thinned a little. A white figure suddenly passed through the fog. It was a white fox with 2 tails. Phantasmagoria's gaze swept past the fox demon and continued to disperse the fog. This page of the heavenly book contained the inheritance of the Fox clan. Although the Fox clan was also demonic, their cultivation was different from that of the demonic cultivators. The ancestors of the Fox clan had opened up a completely different cultivation path for them. The weak Fox clan, when cultivated to the peak, could become the king of the demonic cultivators. They had heaven demons as subordinates and heaven dragons as mounts. However, as the heaven foxes fell one after another, no new heaven foxes were born. The Fox clan gradually declined. The fog in front of her gradually thinned. More and more fox shadows flew past Phantasmagoria's eyes. These foxes were 2-tailed, 3-tailed, 4-tailed, and one of them was 5-tailed. Phantasmagoria's face still did not reveal a satisfied expression. 3 years ago, she was able to obtain the inheritance of the 5-tailed fox demon from the heavenly book. Until now, she had not met a 6-tailed fox. Back then, her father had obtained the inheritance of the 7-tailed fox by chance. That was why he had the strength and status he had today. If she could meet a six-tailed fox spirit and obtain its inheritance, she would be able to advance to six-tailed at the fastest speed possible. Unfortunately, to obtain this level of inheritance, besides strength, she also needed luck. The Heaven Lord of Illusions looked at Phantasmagoria, who was immersed in the heavenly book, and silently walked out of the cave. He looked at a disciple of the Mirage faction and asked, "Have you found the Demon Emperor's spiritual corpse?" The disciple shook his head and said, "Heaven Lord, we have not found any traces of it." The Heaven Lord of Illusions said calmly, "Continue to search." The heavenly book had fallen into Limu's hands. This was an unchangeable fact. However, possessing the heavenly book only gave one the possibility to become a powerhouse. It could not immediately make one a powerhouse. The 6 Taoist sects all had heavenly books. Their strongest powerhouses were only in the 7th realm. What's more, the heavenly book of the demon clan was useless to the human clan. However, the demon emperor's corpse was different. It was the corpse of a heavenly demon. If it was handed over to the corpse sect and refined, even if it could not restore his peak strength, it would certainly create a powerhouse in the upper realm. This was more beneficial than the heavenly book. Yingzhou bordered the northeast of the ancestral continent. There were many mountains and poisonous barriers in the territory. Although the territory was vast, there were no human countries. There were only poisonous insects and beasts everywhere. The trees and flowers that could survive here were generally highly poisonous. Very few people knew that the corpse sect of the 10 demonic sects was in Yingzhou. Among the 10 demonic sects, the corpse sect was the most repulsive. Although the soul sect and the demon sect had committed all kinds of evil, ghosts were the souls of humans, and demons were also living beings. They shared the same emotions as humans. In some novels, love between humans and ghosts, or between humans and demons, transcending life and death, and transcending races, happened from time to time. However, no one had ever written a story about humans and corpses. After all, in the eyes of most people, zombies were inhumane creatures that only knew how to suck blood and bite people. They were more terrifying than demons and ghosts. The people of the corpse sect spent all day with corpses. Just thinking about it made them shudder. Not only the righteous sects, but even the demonic sects did not like the corpse sect. Their bodies were always filled with thick corpse chi, and they were always thinking about the bodies of others. If a powerhouse of the demonic sects died, and his corpse was still intact, the people of the corpse sect would take the initiative to come and ask for the corpse. If a powerhouse was about to die, they would come in advance and wait to receive their corpse. They did not care about the feelings of the dying person. Therefore, in the demonic sects, the corpse sect was like a jinx. In Yingzhou, in a hollow mountain somewhere, there was a burst of shock. What? The White Thearch's cave abode has appeared. There are countless demon corpses from 3,000 years ago inside. The White Thearch's corpse is also inside. That's the corpse of a 9th realm powerhouse. It's something that can't be found even in a few hundred years. Why didn't you say so earlier? If I can use a 9th realm corpse as material to refine a spirit corpse in this life, even if I die, it'll be worth it. Figures sat cross-legged on the stone platform in the cave. Although they were all humans, their bodies were filled with thick corpse chi. This was not because they were about to die, but because they spent all day with corpses. Below the stone platform was an extremely wide platform. On the platform, hundreds of corpses stood neatly. The entire cave was filled with corpse chi. The figures on the stone platform were all filled with regret. Refining a 9th realm demon corpse was something they did not even dare to dream of. Every corpse sect disciple saw this as their life's ultimate goal. Everyone sighed and lamented that they missed the chance to obtain a 9th realm demon corpse. I heard that many people died in the demon emperor's cave abode. It's a pity that they're corpses. When are those old fellows from the various sects going to die? Wouldn't it be great if we could have a 7th realm corpse to practice on? I wonder if the Great Elder is really dead. It's a pity that his corpse was not left behind. Even if it's not a 7th realm corpse, a peak 6th realm corpse would suffice. With the Great Elder's sinister intelligence, how could he die so easily? It's not like it's the first time he died. His longest death was when he disappeared for 10 years before reappearing. Not even 2 years have passed. Who knows, he might come back on his own one day. Demon Emperor's cave abode. Li Mu looked at the 10 demon corpses in front of him, deep in thought. 3,000 years ago, the spirit chi of heaven and earth was dense, and powerful cultivators were everywhere. As subordinates of the Demon Emperor, even the weakest of the 10 demons was at Xianjizi's current level of cultivation. If he followed the corpse sect's top-notch corpse refining techniques, he could at least refine 6th realm demon corpses. 2 of them even had hopes of reaching 7th realm. Of course, demon corpses of this level were not easy to refine. The amount of materials needed to refine them was enormous. Li Mu had asked Xianjizi and the Empress. The materials he needed could not be gathered even if Mount Baiyun and the imperial court combined. When he thought of this, Li Mu's gaze involuntarily turned to the northeast. That was the direction of Yingzhou. Very few people knew that the corpse sect's headquarters was in the deserted Yingzhou. When it came to refining corpses, the corpse sect was undoubtedly the most professional. With thousands of years of accumulation, they had all the materials Li Mu needed there. Li Mu thought for a moment, and the aura on his body suddenly changed. The Empress, who was reading a book lazily in her chair, looked up and glanced at him, asking, "What are you doing?" Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about me, Your Majesty. I'm going to practice in advance." Chapter 418. The question of "Who am I?" that the White Emperor Demon Corpse had once struggled with was actually not completely meaningless. At this moment, sitting in Chang'e Palace was Li Mu, the Thousand Illusions Venerable, and the Demon Emperor White Emperor. He had the memories of the Thousand Illusions Venerable and the White Emperor, knew all their secrets, and knew everyone they knew. With this, he could flawlessly pretend that he had been possessed by the Thousand Illusions Venerable, or the White Emperor. If he said he was the Corpse Sect's Grand Elder, then he was the Corpse Sect's Grand Elder. Compared to the Thousand Illusions Venerable being possessed, most people were more willing to believe that he had possessed someone else. Although the Corpse Sect was also one of the 10 demonic sects, they were not interested in anything other than tomb raiding and refining corpses. Li Mu and the Empress had worked hard to turn the Demon Emperor's cave into a paradise. The mountains were green, the water was green, and the flowers were fragrant. However, there were always 10 corpses that had been dead for 3,000 years. Every time Li Mu thought about it, he felt uncomfortable. Rather than letting them gather dust in the cave, it was better to send them to the Corpse Sect, and let the corpse refiners help refine them. At the same time, it saved Li Mu a lot of manpower and resources. However, the premise of all this was to make them believe that Li Mu was the Thousand Illusions Venerable. It was not difficult to do this, but he did not want to expose his true identity. The art of transformation was a mystical power that only level 6 cultivators were qualified to learn. Even if Li Mu used the false appearance talisman, he could not guarantee that there would be no flaws. He closed his eyes and searched in his mind. When he opened his eyes again, his face changed. Soon he had become a stranger. This was not a Taoist mystical power, but a demon technique. The false appearance mystical power was an illusory technique that was cast with spells. If it met someone with a high cultivation, they would be seen through at a glance. On the other hand, this demon technique that had been lost with the fall of the White Emperor could change one's appearance without leaving a trace. Of course, demon techniques had their advantages, but Taoist techniques also had their limitations. The Tao sect's divine ability allowed one to transform into any appearance they wished with the help of Dharma spells. Regardless of whether it was a person's face, a rock, a wooden stake, a cow, or a dog, there was nothing it could not do. Demonic arts were not so random. At most, they could change their appearance, but not their figure. If they wanted to change into the appearance of anyone, they would need to cultivate to a high level. It seemed that Tao arts were stronger, but Tao arts were essentially illusions. All illusions had the risk of being seen through. As for this demonic technique, even though there were many limitations when it was executed, it would leave no traces behind after the transformation, making it difficult for others to notice. There was also the invisibility spell. The Taoist invisibility spell could hide one's body, clothes, weapons, magic treasures, all the accessories on one's body, and any external objects that the caster wanted to hide. They were both invisible, But demonic arts were not as magical. It could only hide the caster's body, hair, and skin. It did not include clothes or any other external objects. In other words, if he wanted to become invisible through demonic arts, he would have to strip naked from head to toe. This seemed to be a useless spell, but it was very difficult to completely hide one's aura and spiritual power. Once any spiritual power fluctuations were revealed, even if others couldn't see it with the naked eye, they would be able to perceive their existence. As for the invisibility spell, it was born from a certain lizard's innate divine ability. It didn't consume any spiritual power at all, so naturally, there would be no spiritual power fluctuations. Not only could it make people disappear out of thin air, but it could also integrate with any surrounding environment without any disharmony. Even a powerhouse of the upper realm wouldn't be able to discover it. Li Mu comprehended a lot of demonic arts from Baidi's memory, and he first learned these two practical ones. The art of disguise that would not be discovered by others allowed him to act with another identity, without exposing himself. As for the invisibility spell, although the casting conditions were a bit awkward, in the face of a life and death crisis, or some incomparably critical moment, who would care about wearing clothes or not? Of course, with Li Mu's caution, he would not joke about his own safety without confirmation. The transformation spell would not be exposed. Li Mu had already confirmed this through the Empress. As for the other one, it was inconvenient for him to take the initiative to look for the Empress. Li Mu thought for a while and returned to his room. A moment later, Wan and Xiaobai, who were sitting cross-legged on the bed, suddenly found that the door of their room was pushed open. Xiaobai turned her head and took a look and said in surprise, "Why is the door open? Is it the wind?" Wan turned her head to look, and quickly turned back and said, "It should be the wind, it's your turn. Whoever wins this game will sleep inside tonight." Li Mu walked out of Wan and Xiaobai's room. It seemed that the demonic arts from 3,000 years ago were indeed something. Xiaobai couldn't see through it, but even Wan, who had a small success in her spiritual pupils, couldn't discover him after he was invisible. On the bed in the room, Xiaobai finished moving the chess pieces, and inadvertently looked at Wan, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong with you? Why is your color so red?" After coming out of their room, Li Mu's confidence increased a little. He was barefoot, and using the demonic arts that originated from the cat race, he walked silently. He walked to the entrance of Chang'e Palace, and saw Shangguan Li, who was standing guard outside. He reached out and waved his hand in front of her eyes, but Shangguan Li didn't react at all. Even she couldn't discover him. Li Mu became bolder, and walked into Chang'e Palace. The Empress was reading a book. At this moment, there was no one in the palace, and she was lying on the dragon throne in an even more languid posture than usual. The dragon throne was very big, almost half the size of a bed. The Empress's posture revealed her graceful figure even more. She usually wore a loose dragon robe, which didn't reveal her figure. It was only at this moment that Li Mu realized that the Empress actually had such an impressive figure. He walked around the palace, and the Empress was still quietly reading her book, as if she didn't discover anything. This meant that Li Mu could also hide his figure without leaving any traces in front of other 7th realm cultivators. He frantically tested the Empress a few more times at the edge of danger, but the Empress still didn't react. Li Mu's heart was completely at ease. Just as he was about to leave, the Empress suddenly put down the book in her hand. She skillfully formed a hand seal. Li Mu recognized this hand seal. It was the Mystic Light Technique's hand seal. Why did she use the Mystic Light Technique for no reason? Was she trying to spy on someone? At this moment, Li Mu was also somewhat curious. He looked up at the image displayed by the Mystic Light Technique, and couldn't help but be stunned. The image was actually Chang'e Palace. Li Mu was confused. What was the Empress doing? Was she spying on herself? At the same time, Zhou Yi's face also showed confusion. As if realizing something, she looked in a certain direction corresponding to the Mystic Light Technique. At the end of her line of sight, the invisible Li Mu met the Empress's gaze, and his heart skipped a beat. Zhou Yi stood up and asked in confusion, "What kind of technique is this? Even I can't see through it. How did you do it?" Li Mu's awkward voice came from the void. "Your Majesty, it's not very convenient for me right now. I'll come back and explain later. Zhou said. What's not convenient about it? You dare to play this kind of trick in front of me? Hurry up and show yourself. With that, she waved her sleeves, and a storm of magic power swept out. Li Mu instantly felt a chill all over his body. This demonic technique was naturally practical, but it couldn't resist too much external interference. It was more suitable for sneaking around. Once someone sensed it, they had to immediately use other countermeasures. Under this storm of magic power, he couldn't maintain his invisible state anymore. Although Li Mu escaped into the Demon Emperor's cave at the first moment, Zhou still caught a glimpse of him before he fled in a panic. The scene that she tried so hard to forget once again appeared in her mind. Changel Palace. Mr. Mei walked in slowly and handed a letter to Zhou. He said, Your Majesty, this is what Li Mu asked me to give to Your Majesty. Zhou still hadn't recovered from the morning's events. Her gaze was a little absent-minded. She said, Put it on the table. Mr. Mei shook his head and said strangely, I don't know why he couldn't tell Your Majesty face to face. He hurriedly handed this letter to me and left the palace. Zhou suddenly raised her head and said nervously, What, he left the palace? She sensed and found that Li Mu's aura was indeed gone from the palace. However, Wan Wan and Xiaobai were still there. This made her feel at ease. As long as they were still there, Li Mu wasn't running away. She opened the letter. There were only 2 short lines on it. Your Majesty, I need to go to Yingzhou to deal with the 10 demonic corpses. Then I'll go back to Mount Baiyun to attend Senior Xianjizi's disciple recruitment ceremony. I'll return to the divine capital in a few days. Li Mu. For some reason, Zhou Qiong heaved a sigh of relief after reading the letter. She was still worried. When Li Mu came to Changel Palace later, should she pretend that nothing happened? Or should she pretend to be furious and reprimand him, and then let it go easily? If she pretended that nothing happened, what would he think? Would he think that she was an unreserved woman? If she pretended to be angry and reprimanded him fiercely, she would regret it even more if she hurt his feelings and made him want to leave. Compared to these 2 choices, it was obviously better to separate temporarily. After some time, both of them would forget about this matter and pretend that nothing had happened. At the same time that Zhou breathed a sigh of relief in Changel Palace, Li Mu also breathed a long sigh of relief outside the divine capital. Although running away was shameful, it was useful. Otherwise, he really didn't know how to face the Empress. He didn't even know how to explain it. Although the Empress was already 30 years old, she was still a pure and innocent girl who hadn't seen the world. Li Mu was really worried that he would leave a psychological scar on her. He was even more worried that she would mistakenly think that he had some strange fetish. Suddenly, he didn't have the courage to step into Changel Palace. Rather than stay here and make things awkward for both of them, it was better to separate temporarily and let time wash away everything. He originally planned to find the corpse sect later and deal with the 10 demonic corpses. Now he had to bring it forward. At the Department of Offerings, the slovenly Taoist priest looked at Li Mu and frowned. What are you up to this time? Last time, he followed Li Mu to the demonic emperor's cave. If he didn't come out, his talisman of divine fate would undoubtedly be gone. The slovenly Taoist priest only wanted to spend the year well, get the talisman of divine fate, and then continue to look for opportunities to break through. Li Mu, go to Yingzhou. The slovenly Taoist priest shook his head. No. That kind of place where even birds don't shit. What's the point of going to that? Li Mu, when we come back from Yingzhou, I'll give you the talisman of divine fate. The slovenly Taoist priest stood up and asked, When do we leave? Li Mu, now. Several days later, in the hinterland of Yingzhou, the sky here was gray, and the air was filled with poisonous miasma. 2 figures stepped through the air and floated above a valley. The location of the corpse sect was very secretive. Even the demonic Dao only knew that they were in Yingzhou, but they didn't know the exact location of the corpse sect. However, to Li Mu, who had the memories of the 1,000 illusions, coming to the corpse sect was like going home. It wasn't just like home, it was home. The slovenly Taoist priest asked, You really don't want me to go with you? Li Mu shook his head and said, No need. He dragged the slovenly Taoist priest along just in case. With his current strength, if he encountered an enemy at the peak of the 6th realm, it would be difficult for him to escape. With the slovenly Taoist priest around, unless they encountered a 7th realm, there wouldn't be any accidents. After the death of the Thousand Illusions Venerable Master, there were no more 6th realm cultivators in the corpse sect. Although there were many 5th realm cultivators, with the demonic Emperor's Cave and the Tao Bell, Li Mu could deal with them no matter how many 5th realm cultivators there were. His face changed, and soon, it was the face of a stranger. This person had a white face and was a young man. Li Mu had changed his appearance based on old Wang's. He left the slovenly Taoist priest and continued to fly forward for 10 miles. Arriving in front of a mountain, Li Mu flew forward another 100 feet, and suddenly, a few voices came from the mountain. Scram. This is not a place you can come to. I'll give you 10 breaths. If you don't scram, I'll extract your soul and refine your corpse. Li Mu's body floated in the air and he said calmly, "How dare you?" His voice was steady and powerful, and it echoed throughout the mountain. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. One by one, figures flew out from the mountain. More than 10 figures floated in front of Li Mu, their faces filled with shock. These people were all 5th realm cultivators. Among the 10 demonic sects, the corpse sect's strength was only weaker than the sage sect's. If the Grand Elder, the Thousand Illusions Venerable Master, reached the 7th realm, he could suppress the Thousand Illusions Venerable Master and make the corpse sect the number 1 sect below the sage sect. Unfortunately, with the death of the Thousand Illusions Venerable Master, the corpse sect was leaderless and became a demonic sect. A tall and thin man with a pale face, like a corpse, stared at Li Mu and asked, "Who are you? What business do you have in the corpse sect?" Li Mu smiled and said, "Chen Shi, we haven't seen each other for 3 years, and you don't recognize me?" Chen Shi's expression changed greatly. Although the person in front of him had a different appearance and voice, his expression, actions, and even subtle eyes were exactly the same as the god in his heart, the Grand Elder Thousand Illusions. You're the Grand Elder." Chen Shi blurted out and then said flatly, "No, this is impossible. The Grand Elder's soul lamp has been extinguished. He can't be alive." The Thousand Illusions Venerable Master's soul lamp had been extinguished, which meant that his soul had died long ago. It was impossible for him to appear in front of everyone. The soul lamp and life talisman were connected to the soul. Li Mu couldn't deceive the Nether Saint, and now, he couldn't deceive these people. He didn't deny it and said indifferently, "The Thousand Illusions Venerable Master is indeed dead. The one standing in front of you now is my memory host. I have erased the memory of his original body. Now I am him and he is me." Hearing this, everyone in the soul sect was shocked. Erasing someone else's memory and replacing it with his own. How crazy was he to do such a thing? In this way, who was the identity of the person whose memory was erased? If he was himself, he only had the memory of another person. But if he was Thousand Illusions, he had nothing but Thousand Illusions memory. How could the corpse sect treat him as the Grand Elder? Chen Shi looked at Li Mu and said in a low voice, "What evidence do you have?" Li Mu said indifferently, "Chen Shi, how dare you talk to me like this? Have you forgotten who picked you up from the pile of corpses and taught you how to cultivate and refine corpses?" After saying this, he looked at another person and said, "Han Shursan, what's with that look? Don't think that I don't know about you and the female corpse you refined. Sun Qi has already told everyone about it." Han Shursan's face was red. Looking at the other person, he gritted his teeth and said, "Sun Qi, didn't you say you would keep it a secret for me?" Sun Qi looked embarrassed and said, "I accidentally let it slip." Li Mu continued, "Sun Qi, once, when Han Shursan wasn't around, you secretly did something indescribable with his female corpse. All these years, I didn't tell anyone." Han Shursan was furious. "What? Sun Qi, you bastard. I thought you were my brother, but you did something worse than a beast." Sun Qi retorted, "If I'm worse than a beast, then what are you?" Seeing that the two were about to fight over a spirit corpse, Chen Shi said in a low voice, "Shut up, we'll talk about this later." He looked at Li Mu. At this moment, he didn't have any doubts about what Li Mu said. If he didn't have the head elder's memories, How could he find this place and know everything about the corpse sect? Even so, he still couldn't accept such a special existence. He looked at Li Mu and said, "You said it yourself, you're not the head elder. You only have the head elder's memories. The head elder of the corpse sect is already dead. Go back to where you came from." Li Mu sighed and said regretfully, "If that's the case, then the 10,000-year-old ancient corpses I found can only be refined slowly after I establish the new corpse sect. I wonder if the 2 level 8 ancient corpses can be refined into 2 spirit corpses." Hearing this, everyone in the corpse sect was shocked. What? Level 8 ancient corpse? This is a supreme grade material. I wonder if it's a male or a female. If I can refine a spirit corpse in this lifetime, I can die without regrets. Li Mu said indifferently and turned to leave. In the next moment, an urgent voice came from behind him. "Hold on." Chen Shi looked at Li Mu with a burning gaze and asked, "Can you let us see those ancient corpses?" Li Mu waved his hand, and 10 demon corpses were placed neatly in front of everyone. Everyone looked at these demon corpses, and after a short silence, they were completely shocked. Oh my God, the corpse still has such a strong aura after being dead for so long. He must have been a level 8 powerhouse when he was alive. These 2 corpses are both level 8, and the remaining ones are no lower than level 7. Where did you find these supreme grade ancient corpses? My hands are starting to itch. I want one of these 2 level 8 ancient corpses. Bullshit, that's mine. Then let's see if you have the ability. Want to fight? Looking at the corpse sect disciples arguing endlessly, Li Mu waved his hand again, and the 10 demon corpses were recalled by him. He looked at the group of corpse sect disciples and said indifferently, "Have you seen enough?" The crowd's noise came to an abrupt end. Their gazes met, and soon, everyone had a decision in their eyes. In the next moment, with Chen Shi in the lead, everyone cupped their fists and bowed at the same time, saying loudly, "All corpse sect disciples welcome the return of the head elder." Chapter 419. Greetings, Grand Elder. Greetings, Grand Elder. Dozens of corpse sect disciples stood on the mountain peak and bowed to Li Mu. Li Mu's gaze was indifferent as he said indifferently, "Your words have enlightened me. I'm not Qian Huan, I only obtained his memories. The corpse sect has nothing to do with me, and you have nothing to do with me. From today onwards you are you and I am me. I have nothing to do with you." Plop. Hearing this, the dozens of corpse sect disciples directly knelt on the ground. "Grand Elder, you can't abandon us. The corpse sect can't do without the Grand Elder. You've obtained the Grand Elder's inheritance, you're our Grand Elder. Please forgive our offense just now, Grand Elder." To the corpse sect disciples, it didn't matter whether the person in front of them was Qian Huan or not. It didn't matter whether he had obtained Qian Huan's memories. No matter who it was, to be able to give them 2 level 8 ancient corpses and 8 level 7 ancient corpses, he was the corpse sect's Grand Elder. Even if Grand Elder Qian Huan was still alive, he wouldn't be able to give them so much. As a corpse refiner, what could be more exciting than personally refining a spirit corpse? Not to mention, the person in front of them had Grand Elder Qian Huan's memories. He was more qualified than anyone to become the corpse sect's Grand Elder. Li Mu's expression eased as he said indifferently, "Stand up and speak." The purpose of his words just now was to establish his authority, not to draw a clear line between him and the corpse sect. If he left the corpse sect, where would he find the materials needed to refine corpses? And these professional workers who didn't ask for anything in return. After subduing these people, Li Mu could rest assured and leave them to others. Seeing Li Mu's expression ease, the corpse sect disciples knew that the Grand Elder had forgiven them. They all relaxed and started to get closer to Li Mu. Grand Elder's cultivation is profound. He'll rule the 10 continents for thousands of years. Under Grand Elder's leadership, the corpse sect will surpass the sacred sect sooner or later, and become the leader of the 10 sects. Grand Elder, where did you find these ancient corpses? Li Mu raised his hand, and the crowd stopped talking abruptly. He glanced at the crowd and said, "These 10 ancient corpses are the key to the rise of the corpse sect. No one is allowed to leak this information, not even the sage sect or the other sections. If anyone violates this rule, They will be severely punished. As his voice fell, an extremely powerful aura emanated from his body. This aura swept out, and the people of the corpse sect felt an extreme pressure from the bottom of their hearts. From the very beginning, everyone could feel that the person who called himself the Great Elder was not even at the sixth realm. This was also the reason why they were unwilling to acknowledge him. It was only because of the 10 precious ancient corpses that they temporarily compromised. At this moment, under this imposing aura, they felt as if they were seeing the Great Elder come back to life. There was no doubt that the new First Elder was also an absolute powerhouse. After recovering from his shock, Han 13 patted his chest and promised, "Rest assured, Great Elder. If anyone dares to leak this information, I, Han 13, will be the first to extract his soul and refine his corpse. We are members of the corpse sect in life, and we will die as corpses of the corpse sect. We will follow the orders of the Great Elder." Yes, Great Elder. Although Qian Huan was dead, his prestige in the hearts of the people of the corpse sect was extremely high. Li Mu only used a little trick and easily inherited his position in the corpse sect. The entire corpse sect of the demonic path was the inheritance that Qian Huan left to him. Li Mu took this as Qian Huan possessing Old Wang as compensation for hurting his feelings. Of course, he was also very clear that the reason why the attitude of the people of the corpse sect changed so much was because of the 10 corpses. To a certain extent, the disciples of the corpse sect were all artists. They treated refining corpses as art. It was their art that was not understood by the world. Li Mu released the 10 corpses once again. The people of the corpse sect looked at them, their faces flushed red and their breathing quickened. Li Mu looked at them and said, "I still have important matters to attend to and can't stay in the corpse sect. I will leave these corpses to you. I hope you won't disappoint me." Han 13 licked his lips and said, "Rest assured, Great Elder. With these corpses, the rise of our corpse sect is just around the corner." For the next 3 days, Li Mu stayed in the corpse sect. Refining ordinary corpses was very different from refining corpses of this level. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he personally guided the people of the corpse sect and set up the corpse refining formation. He also confirmed a few important steps with them before he left with peace of mind. These 10 corpses required a lot of materials to refine. It would completely exhaust the wealth of the corpse sect, but no one cared. If they ran out of materials, they could save them up again. Corpses of this level were rare. Long before he came to the Ying continent, Li Mu had used a secret technique to refine these corpses once. This refinement could ensure that no matter how strong they were after they were refined, they would not have their own independent consciousness and could be controlled by Li Mu. In this way, even if the disciples of the corpse sect had other ideas in the future, they would not be able to cause too much trouble. When they left the Ying continent, the sloppy Taoist priest looked at Li Mu with a strange expression and said, "Kid, you have guts." It has always been the demonic Tao who has ideas about others. You are the first one who dares to do this to them. Li Mu did not say anything. He waved his hand and a golden light flew out, and was caught by the sloppy Taoist priest. The sloppy old Taoist priest glanced at him. "It's still early for a year," Li Mu said. "From now on, Senior is free." When he had tried to rope in the sloppy Taoist priest, it was only to intimidate the Department of Worship. Now the Department of Worship no longer needed his intimidation. Li Mu also did not need to force him to stay. The lifelong pursuit of an expert of this level was to find that glimmer of hope to transcend. If he stayed in the Department of Worship and became a pawn of the imperial court, it would be very difficult for him to find his own Tao. Back then, he had enlightened Li Mu and it was not something that could be repaid with a mere 800 coins. Take this heavenly secret talisman as a token of gratitude for his guidance. The sloppy Taoist priest held the heavenly secret talisman with a look of admiration and said, "If Talisman Daozi did not beat me to it, I would really want to take you as my disciple." Li Mu smiled and cupped his hands. "I wish Senior to step into the Transcendence Great Tao as soon as possible." The sloppy Taoist priest waved his hand and said, "I also wish you to enter the bridal chamber as soon as possible and become the mother of the world." He took a last look at Li Mu before his body turned into a stream of light and disappeared into the horizon. Li Mu floated in the void alone and sighed in his heart. He had already taken all the shortcuts in his cultivation. How could it be so easy to step into the Dongxian? As for dominating the world, it was even more impossible. The 10 continents and 3 islands were vast and boundless. Although everyone knew that the 7th realm was the peak, no one knew if there were 8th and 9th realms in some secret places. Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and stopped thinking about these things. He had to take one step at a time. Thinking about these things too early was not good for his cultivation. He identified the direction and flew towards the northwest. A few days later on Mount Baiyun, in the Taoist palace on the main peak, Xian Jizi said in surprise, "Junior brother, didn't you say that you would come in a few days? Why are you here so early?" Li Mu said, "I have nothing to do in the imperial court, so I came a few days earlier." The real reason was that he was hiding from the empress. This time, he had lost a lot of face in front of the empress. He did not even bring Wanwan, and Xiao Bai and fled. He had to at least wait until the end of the apprenticeship ceremony, and wait until the empress had completely forgotten about that matter before he appeared in front of her. Xian Jizi smiled and said, "You came back just in time. Qing, or just came out of seclusion yesterday." Li Qing's cultivation was originally at the 4th realm. In the past 2 months, under the cultivation of the Fulu school, her cultivation was already at the peak of the 4th realm. She was only 1 step away from the 5th realm. This small step did not rely on seclusion, but on chance. Lu Hanyan and Yu Zhenzi were traveling outside. Li Mu held Li Qing's hand and strolled around Mount Baiyun. The two of them met up with Han Jie and talked about the days when they were constables in Yangqiu County. Seeing Li Qing reminiscing, Li Mu suggested that the two of them go back to the county yamen to have a look. At Qingxian Peak, Han Jie looked at the two of them leaving and sighed. He said, "Junior sister Li still benefited that guy in the end. So what if he's good-looking? Just because he's good-looking he can marry too." Junior sister Qin stood beside him and snorted softly. She said, "Are you still not giving up on senior sister Li?" Han Jie shook his head and said, "How can that be? As early as 2 years ago, when she rejected me, I gave up on her. Besides, she and Li Mu are both my friends. How can I still have such feelings for her?" Junior sister Qin raised her eyebrows. "Really? Really?" Han Jie let out a long sigh and said, "Junior sister Li is like a flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. Instead of pursuing these illusory things, it's better to cherish the person in front of you. Li Si told me this a long time ago. I actually only understood it now." Junior sister Qin pursed her lips and combed the hair in front of her forehead. She asked, You're finally enlightened." Han Jie rolled his eyes at her and said, "I'm not stupid." Junior sister Qin asked, "How do you plan to cherish the person in front of you?" Han Jie suddenly looked at her with burning eyes. Junior sister Qin's face turned red. She clasped her hands together and looked down at her toes. Han Jie said, "Junior sister Qin, I have something to say to you for a long time. I don't know if you're willing to," Junior sister Qin said without hesitation. "I'm willing." Han Jie said happily, "Then help me ask senior sister Zheng if she's willing to be my Dao companion." Junior sister Qin lowered her head. After a long silence, she raised her head and said with a smile, "Okay." She flew back to the mountain gate and came to the female disciple's residence. She knocked on a door. A female disciple opened the door and asked doubtfully, "Junior sister Qin, what's the matter?" Junior sister Qin looked at her and said, "Senior sister Zheng, senior brother Han asked me to pass on a message to you." The female disciple asked, "What message?" Junior martial sister Qin said, "He said that you have an oval face, no breasts, no buttocks, and you have a terrible temper. Whoever becomes your Dao companion will have 8 lifetimes of bad luck." 15 minutes later, Han Jie, whose face was bruised and his clothes were full of holes, sat on the ground in a sorry state. He looked up at the sky and asked loudly, "Why? Why did you do this to me? Is it wrong to like someone?" Junior sister Qin used the spiritual liquid to help him heal the bruises on his face. She shook her head and said, "This is a good thing. It let you see senior sister Zheng's temper in advance. If you two become Dao companions in the future, and she treats you like this every day, it will be too late for you to regret it." Han Jie thought carefully and nodded. You seem to be right. Junior sister Qin smiled and said, Of course. You're my only family in this world. How can I lie to you? Next time if you like any senior sister, tell me. I'll help you confess. Hanja waved his hand and said, Forget it. I've thought it through. Women will only affect my cultivation speed. I'll cultivate wholeheartedly in the future. Junior sister Qin looked at him with a smile and said, Then I'll accompany you. Yangqiu County. The county government. There were not many familiar faces in the place where Li Mu and Li Qing used to work together. In the former duty room, Constable Zhou looked at their tightly held hands and said with a smile, I knew it. I knew it. The cultivators in the government office had changed again and again. Most of the constables had changed. Only Constable Zhou remained the same. The county government office was still the same, but Li Mu and Li Qing were not the same as before. After chatting with Constable Zhou for a while, the two walked out of the county government office and walked on the street hand in hand. In 2 years, the noodle stall that Li Qing liked to eat the most no longer had the same taste as before. Some of the familiar shops along the street were more ostentatious. Some had changed their business because of poor management. Roast chicken, crispy outside and tender inside. Roast chicken only costs 10 copper coins. 20 copper coins for 3, 100 copper coins for 12. Walking on the street, Li Mu suddenly smelled a tempting fragrance. He and Li Qing looked at the corner of the street at the same time. Li Qing said in surprise, It's them. At the corner of the street, a middle-aged couple stood in front of a temporary stall and shouted loudly. The middle-aged couple was short and ugly. However, the roasted chicken they were selling had a tempting aroma that whetted one's appetite with just a sniff. Because of that, their business was very good. The customers in front of the stall had already formed a long line. In Li Mu's eyes, they were not a middle-aged couple but two weasels. After 2 years, Li Mu and Li Qing met the weasel couple again. There were many customers. Although the two monsters were in a hurry, their faces were full of joy. We don't have any more today. Please come again tomorrow. I'm really sorry. We'll definitely prepare a few more tomorrow. Sorry. Come here tomorrow to buy roast chicken. We'll give you a bowl of chicken soup for free. The weasel couple sold the last roast chicken and put away the stall. They had a happy expression on their faces. If they maintained this business, they would be able to buy a small house here in half a year at most. Suddenly, the weasel seemed to have sensed something and looked forward. A young man and woman were holding hands. They waved at them, and then turned to leave. The weasel was stunned for a moment. Then joy appeared on his face. He subconsciously wanted to chase after them, but was stopped by the woman beside him. The woman shook her head and said, Don't disturb them. The weasel looked forward again. If what he was looking at was a painting, then the two figures were the most beautiful colors in the painting. They were so beautiful that one could not bear to destroy them. The weasel took a step forward and retracted his steps. If it were not for them, the couple would have been destroyed in body and soul. The weasel couple knelt down and kowtowed a few times in the direction where the two figures disappeared, ignoring the surprised eyes of the passers-by on the street. Seeing the weasel couple's current appearance, Li Mu was very gratified. They had helped each other in difficult times and grew old together. These two demons had lived the life that Li Mu wanted. What he longed for was not status or power. It was enough for him to be able to do what he loved with the person he loved. He held Li Qing's hand tightly and took her into the flask space. The two stood by the lake. Li Mu looked at Li Qing, who was shocked by the scenery in front of her, and said softly, This is where we will live in the future. Li Qing came back to her senses after a long time. Li Mu took her to the row of lakeside houses and said, You can live in whichever one you like in the future. Li Qing thought for a moment, and pointed to an exquisite small building with a flower garden in front of the courtyard. She said, I like this one. P.S. You can follow my WX public account, not Rong Xiaorong. I made a map of the world of Great Zhou myself. It is not easy to find the Easter egg after it is posted. I will post it on the public account at the same time. The public account will also update the character designs and so on. It will be easier to find it in the future. Chapter 420. Li Mu looked at the exquisite building with a flower bed, and was speechless for a moment. This building was built by the Empress for herself. Every beam, every piece of wood, and every blade of grass in the flower bed were all made by the Empress. If she came here in the future, and saw that someone had taken over her home, Li Mu couldn't imagine how furious she would be. One was his superior who loved and protected him. The other was his beloved woman. Li Mu's heart was in a dilemma as to which side to lean towards. Angering the Empress wouldn't end well. No one knew this better than Li Mu. But Li Mu didn't want his beloved woman to be sad. Li Qing saw his strange expression and asked, "What's wrong? Is this building not okay?" Li Mu's throat moved. He shook his head and said, "It's not that it's not okay. It's just that I suddenly want to build a house with you. A house that we built with our own hands. A house that belongs to us. Every structure of the house will be designed by us. We can also open a small garden in front of the house and plant the flowers we like in the garden." Li Qing imagined the scene that Li Mu described. Her beautiful face showed that she was moved. Compared to this small building in front of her, being able to build a house of love with the person she loved was obviously more meaningful. She nodded her head and said, "Okay." Li Mu wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and said, "Let's go. Let's go prepare the materials to build the house." 3 days later, Mount Baiyun. There was still some time before the disciple recruitment ceremony. Li Qing once again entered seclusion. Xianjizi had exchanged a top-grade medicinal pill from the Pill Cauldron sect, which could help her completely cross the last barrier between the divine ability and the creation realm. Li Mu also took advantage of his free time to cultivate in seclusion on Mount Baiyun. It was very difficult for his cultivation of Tao to improve in a short period of time. His cultivation of Buddhism had also reached a bottleneck. Li Mu put most of his energy into learning demonic arts. Every path of cultivation had its own strengths and weaknesses. The more one dabbled in, the more one would have their own strengths and fewer weaknesses. The various demonic techniques recorded in the Demon Race's Heavenly Book were extremely useful to Li Mu, and he began to think about the other heavenly books. Each of the 6 Taoist sects had a Tao page. It was very likely that the Buddhists had one as well. The Demon Race's Heavenly Book was in Li Mu's hands. The Fox Race's Heavenly Book was in the hands of the 10,000 Illusions Lord. The Ghost Tao's Heavenly Book was nowhere to be found. The other heavenly books were also rarely found. Among the heavenly books, Li Mu came into contact with the other 5 sects of the Tao sect the easiest. However, even though the 6 sects were all part of the Tao sects, it was impossible for them to lend their sect's treasures to others to comprehend. Unless Li Mu hid his identity and became a core disciple of one of the sects, or participated in the various sects' disciple recruitment trials and obtained first place, none of these methods were realistic for Li Mu. Li Mu stopped thinking about these and continued to comprehend the demonic techniques. At a certain moment, a Fulu flew in from outside and landed in the courtyard. The Fulu flashed and Li Mu heard Xianjizi's voice. "Junior brother, please make a trip to the main peak's Tao Palace." Xianjizi must have called him for something. Li Mu left the small hut and quickly flew to the main peak. In the main peak's Tao Palace, other than Xianjizi, there was also a woman. She looked to be in her 30s and her skin was delicate and tight. She was like a charming young married woman, but her cultivation was already at the 6th realm. Li Mu naturally wouldn't think that she was only in her 30s or 40s. This woman had the fragrance of elixirs. The people of the Danding sect had always paid attention to maintaining their appearance, and they didn't lack elixirs to retain their looks. This woman was also a first seat of the Danding sect, and her age wouldn't be much younger than Yuzhen. Li Mu walked into the Tao Palace and asked, "Senior brother, what's the matter?" Xianjizi looked at the woman and introduced her to Li Mu. "This is fellow Taoist Heng Yangzi of the Danding sect." Li Mu cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Heng Yangzi." Heng Yangzi returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Ling Jizi." Xianjizi said slowly, "To be honest, the only person in our sect who can refine the Tianji talisman is junior brother Ling Jizi. This matter requires his approval." Although a trace of shock flashed through the depths of Heng Yangzi's eyes, he didn't doubt Xianjizi's words. He cupped his hands again and said to Li Mu, "Please, fellow Taoist Ling Jizi." Li Mu was still confused and looked at Xianjizi. Xianjizi explained, "It's like this, a senior of the Danding sect." After listening to him, Li Mu understood why the Danding sect sent 2 first seats to Mount Baiyun. Other than congratulating Xianjizi on finding a beloved disciple, they also had a request. A grand elder of the Danding sect was nearing the end of his life, and hoped to ask for a Tianji talisman from the Fulu school to extend his lifespan by 10 more years. For Li Mu, this wasn't a big deal. At most, it would take more effort. However, even blood brothers had to settle accounts. In the cultivation world, no one would ask for help like this. Li Mu looked at Xianjizi and asked, "The materials for the Tianji talisman?" Heng Yangzi took the initiative and said, "The Danding sect will bear all the materials for the talisman." This was what they should bear. When Li Mu didn't know how to hint to her, Heng Yangzi continued, "If the talisman is successful, we will also prepare a generous gift for the Fulu school." The one who had to bear the burden was Li Mu. He couldn't let Xianjizi take advantage of him. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "Actually, I'm also interested in alchemy." Heng Yangzi immediately said, "I can give you a book on alchemy. The book contains the insights of the seniors of my sect on alchemy." Li Mu said, "I heard that the Danding sect's Tao page contains the truth of alchemy." Heng Yangzi understood what he meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "I can't make the decision on my own. I need to ask the sect master." Heng Yangzi walked out of the Tao palace and quickly returned. He said, "Senior sister has agreed. If the Tianji talisman is successful, we can let fellow Taoist Ling Jizi study our Tao page once." This result was within Li Mu's expectations. Although the Tao page was a precious treasure of each sect, it wasn't that they never showed it to others. The Fulu school would let the first place in the talisman Tao trial to study the Tao page once. After they studied it, they could choose to join the sect or not. Li Mu chose to join, while Zhou Zhong chose to leave. The other 5 sects also had the same rule. The 6 sects had been passed down for thousands of years. Countless seniors of the sects had studied the Tao page and passed it down while innovating. What made the 6 sects what they were today was not the Tao page, but the hard work of generations of seniors of the sections. Therefore, borrowing the Danding sect's Tao page to study was not a matter of principle for the Danding sect. After receiving the Danding sect's promise, Li Mu cracked his knuckles and stretched his muscles. He said to Xianjizi, "Senior brother, we can begin." Several days later, dark clouds gathered in the sky above White Cloud Mountain again, accompanied by a strong heavenly might. After experiencing it once, the elders and disciples of White Cloud Mountain were used to it. They already knew that the appearance of this kind of heavenly phenomenon on White Cloud Mountain meant the birth of a saint-level Fulu. Wasn't it normal for a saint-level Fulu to be born in the ancestral court of Fulu school? Soon, the first seats flew towards the thunderclouds. Not long after, the thunderclouds dissipated and the sky returned to normal. In the Taoist palace on the main peak, Hyun Jinko handed the divine secret talisman to Heng Yangzi. Heng Yangzi carefully accepted it and cupped his hands. "Thank you, Taoist Xianjizi, Taoist Ling Jizi." Then she stretched out her hand and a blank page appeared in her palm. Li Mu's cultivation was no longer the same as before. In addition, before he wrote the talisman, the Pill Cauldron sect had given him a lot of elixirs to recover his magic power and mind. At this moment, he was in a good state. Li Mu took the page and sat down cross-legged. When his mind touched the page, it immediately sank into another space. What entered his eyes was a familiar fog. Li Mu did not delay. He closed his eyes and began to recite the clear heart mantra over and over again. He did not know how many times he recited it. When he opened his eyes, the fog in front of him had disappeared. In a desolate and broken world, there was scorched earth everywhere. Countless giant beasts were wreaking havoc on the ground. In the distance, countless figures stood in the air. Countless streams of light flew out from their hands. The streams of light streaked past Li Mu's eyes. He could vaguely see that there were round pills in the light. A pill flew into the middle of a few giant beasts and exploded. A black hole appeared at the spot where the pill exploded. The giant beasts were instantly sucked into the black hole and disappeared. A pill flew into the mouth of a giant beast. The giant beast roared and fell to the ground powerlessly. Soon it turned into stone. Some pills exploded, turning into flames that could not be extinguished. Some pills touched the giant beast and turned into blue ice. Li Mu had seen a similar scene in the Fulu School's Dao page. The difference was that those people could draw talismans in the air, but these humans used pills as weapons to attack these giant beasts. They would also throw some pills into their mouths. They seemed to be used to recover their spiritual power. A pill flew in from afar and passed through Li Mu's body. A piece of information suddenly appeared in Li Mu's mind. After realizing what this was, Li Mu reached out and grabbed another pill that flew in front of him. The pill passed through his palm, and Li Mu grabbed nothing but air. However, a new piece of information appeared in his mind. The pill cauldron sect's Dao page was someone else's after all. There was only one chance to comprehend it. Li Mu flew into the crowd and touched the pills up close. Pieces of information about the Dao of alchemy flowed into Li Mu's mind. In the Dao palace, Heng Yangzi instinctively sensed that something was wrong. He looked puzzled. Xian Jizi smiled and asked, "What's wrong, Daoist Heng Yangzi?" Heng Yangzi said, "Comprehending the Dao page requires a lot of mental energy. Daoist Ling Jizi's cultivation is not high, but he can persist for so long." Xian Jizi looked at him and said meaningfully, "Although my junior brother's cultivation is limited, his mental state is abnormally firm. Even I admire him." At a certain moment, Li Mu, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, suddenly opened his eyes. He stood up and returned the Dao page to Heng Yangzi. He said, "Thank you." Heng Yangzi put away the Dao page and asked, "How much did Daoist Ling Jizi comprehend?" Li Mu said humbly, a little." Chapter 421. With the experience of comprehending the Fulu Dao page last time, Li Mu had learned to keep a low profile. He had said that he was just going to take a look, but in the end, Li Mu had inherited everything that the Danding sect had inherited from the Dao page. What the Danding sect had not comprehended from the Dao page, Li Mu had also secretly learned. It was no exaggeration to say that the current him could already use his knowledge of alchemy to establish a second Danding sect. It was just that there was no need to do so. Hearing Li Mu say that he had only comprehended a little, Heng Yangzi was finally relieved. After all, the Dao page was an item of the sect's inheritance. If it were not for the fact that they had a favor to ask of the Fulu school this time, they definitely would not have taken the Dao page out to trade. Heng Yangzi put away the Tianji talisman and the Dao page, and quickly left. Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu and asked, "Junior brother, how much have you comprehended from the Danding sect's inheritance?" Li Mu shrugged and said, "I can swear to the heavenly Dao that it really is only a little." Xian Jizi thought to himself that perhaps he was overthinking. It was already rare for him to have such talent in the Dao of talismans and the Dao of Dao. Wanting him to also have such high attainments in alchemy was a bit too much. At this time, Li Mu looked at Xian Jizi with shining eyes and asked, "Senior brother, can you borrow the Dao pages of the other 4 sects to take a look?" Xian Jizi shook his head and said, "I'm afraid not. If it's just the Danding sect, we can still use your interest in alchemy as an excuse. If we use the same excuse for all the other sects, it would seem that we have ulterior motives." Xian Jizi's words made sense. The Fulu school had its own Dao page. If they wanted to take it for free, they obviously had bad intentions. The various Daoist sects might think that the Fulu school had the ambition of swallowing up the 5 sections. Although all the sects had this idea, thinking and doing were 2 different things. In the next few days, Li Mu began to digest the knowledge of alchemy he had obtained from the Dao page. Cultivators generally believed that the function of pills was to gather the essence of spiritual objects in the world. After consuming it, it could increase one's magic power and heal injuries. However, this understanding was obviously narrow. From what Li Mu had seen, the cultivators of ancient times mostly used pills as weapons. Just like the Fulu school's Fulu, they could greatly increase one's battle prowess. Unfortunately, the Dan Cauldron sect did not pass down those powerful pill treasures. The Pill Cauldron school was very sincere. After letting Li Mu comprehend the Dao page, they also gave him an alchemy book and an alchemy furnace. The book of alchemy was not precious. It was an entry-level book in the world of cultivation. The 6 Taoist sects were very generous. They did not forbid the circulation of some basic fu, pills, and formations. Instead, they supported it. This was also the reason why the Taoist sects had grown so rapidly in the past few hundred years. Unlike the other sects, Taoism was more willing to share. Of course, the core secrets of the Taoist sects were only known to the upper echelons and core disciples. The alchemy book that the Pill Cauldron School gave Li Mu was only an entry-level book. What was truly precious was the annotations in the alchemy book. This would allow Li Mu to avoid many detours. After asking Xianjizi for some spiritual herbs, Li Mu began to try refining pills. At first, he failed a few furnaces. However, when he discovered that the art of tranquility could also be used to refine pills, his success rate greatly increased. Although writing talismans and refining pills were two different things, there were similarities. One required one to control the talisman's magic power, while the other required one to control the temperature of the flames. If one's mind wavered, the fu would be destroyed. Similarly, if one's magic power wavered, the flames would become unstable, and the pills in the cauldron would be destroyed. During this period, Li Mu used the materials given to him by Xianjizi to practice on Mount Baiyun. After a few days, when he returned to the divine capital and joined forces with the Empress, he might have a chance to refine a saint-level pill. Half a month later, the Fu Lu School's headmaster Xianjizi and Elder Yuzenzi's apprenticeship ceremony was held as scheduled. This was a rare occasion for the Fu Lu School in recent years. The other 5 sects of Taoism, the major subsects of the Fu Lu School, and some reputable sects in the cultivation world all sent people to Mount Baiyun to congratulate them. The names of Li Qing and Lu Hanyan were also known by the major sects in the cultivation world. As the direct disciples of the Fu Lu School's headmaster and great elder, their futures were limitless. It could even be said that the future of the Fu Lu School rested on their shoulders. In these few days, the 2 girls received so many gifts that their hands went soft. Li Mu purposely built a few more rooms in the cave to store the gifts they received. Inside the cave, Lu Hanyan stood by the lake and sighed. "What a beautiful place," Li Mu said. "This will be our home from now on." Lu Hanyan looked at Li Mu and asked, "I heard little sister Qing say that the 2 of you personally built a small building here?" Li Mu immediately said, "At that time, you were outside. I originally planned to build one here when you came back." Lu Hanyan waved her hand and said, "I'm too lazy to build one. The small buildings here are all good. I'll just pick one." As soon as she finished speaking, Li Mu's heart skipped a beat. He pretended not to care at all and said, "Then you can choose whatever you want." Lu Hanyan walked around the lake and sized up the small buildings. Li Mu walked to her side and suggested, "What do you think of this one? It's facing south and has the best feng shui." Lu Hanyan shook her head and said, "I don't like this one." Li Mu continued, "What about this one? The terrace outside is so good. You can usually play the zither on it." Lu Hanyan continued to shake her head and said, "It's mediocre and has no characteristics." When passing by another small building, Li Mu quickened his pace and glanced around. He thought to himself, "Please don't choose this one, please don't choose this one." Lu Hanyan stopped and pointed to an exquisite small building with a flower garden. She said, "This one." Li Mu stopped and said with a smile, "Actually, I think it's more meaningful for the 2 of us to build a love house with our own hands." Lu Hanyan said, "But I really like this small building. Look at how beautiful it is. It's like a palace, and there's a small flower garden in front of it." Li Mu's throat moved. He said, "We can copy this small building and build an identical." Lu Hanyan asked, "Since we already have one, why do we have to build another one?" Li Mu said, "This is different. Don't you want to have a small building built by the 2 of us?" Lu Hanyan said indifferently, "No need to be so troublesome. There's no difference anyway." Li Mu looked at her and said helplessly, "Why are you so unromantic?" Lu Hanyan frowned and said, "Are you saying that I'm not as romantic as Sister Qing?" As expected, when there's a new person, you forget the old. Do you think that I can't compare to her in any way? Li Mu hurriedly explained, "It's not like that. Actually, it's..." Lu Hanyan asked angrily, "What is it?" Actually, this small building belongs to Her Majesty the Empress. Her Majesty the Empress? Why is Her Majesty the Empress small building in our house? Yes. Why are you hesitating? Is it because... No wonder you ran to the palace when we were not at home, and didn't even go home. No wonder Her Majesty is so good to you. No wonder the rumors say that you are Empress Li. It turns out that what they said is true. After deducing for a while, Li Mu shook his head and threw these thoughts out of his mind. He could never say that to Lu Hanyan, otherwise, things would become more difficult to end. Lu Hanyan was still waiting for Li Mu's answer. She asked, "Why are you shaking your head? Why don't you let me choose this one?" Li Mu raised his head and explained, "Because Qing and I built this small building by ourselves. I'm worried that if you don't have it, you will think that I'm biased." "I see." Lu Hanyan held Li Mu's hand and said, "Don't worry. I won't think too much. I don't want to be so troublesome." She held Li Mu's hand and walked into the small building. After looking around the small building, she was more satisfied. It's so beautiful inside. This bed is so big. It's so comfortable to lie down. The tables and chairs here are also made of spiritual wood. The carvings on them are so exquisite. They must be the work of a famous artist. The paintings on the wall, are they the original works of Dao Xianjinren from the previous dynasty? Most of his paintings have been lost. Where did you find them? These two vases are also so beautiful. They must be expensive? Li Mu stood in the room and squeezed out a smile. He said, "As long as you like it." Xian Jizi and Yuzhenzi's disciple recruitment ceremony ended. Li Mu stayed for a few more days before returning to Chengdu. Lu Hanyan and Li Qing did not return. In the following days, they would receive the true inheritance of Fulu School. This was the most important opportunity for them to enter the 6th realm, and even the 7th realm. After returning to Chengdu, Li Mu stayed at home for 2 days to make sufficient preparations before going to the palace. At the entrance of Changle Palace, he nervously asked Shangguanli, "Is Her Majesty here?" Shangguanli nodded and said, "Her Majesty is reading a book. You can go in by yourself." Li Mu walked into Changle Palace and saw the Empress reclining on the dragon throne. He said softly, "Your Majesty." The Empress's face was hidden behind the book. She said lightly, "Wait for me to finish reading this page." She read this page for a full quarter of an hour. Li Mu saw that she was holding the book upside down, but did not dare to remind her. After a long time, she put down the book and stood up. She asked, "What's the result of the trip to Yingzhou?" Li Mu said, "I have successfully gained the trust of Corpse Sect, and had them refine the 10 demonic corpses for me." The Empress asked, "Aren't you afraid that they will use them against you after they refine them?" Li Mu explained, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. I have already used the spirit-splitting technique to deal with the 10 demonic corpses. No matter who refine them, they will only listen to my command." After that, the Empress asked him some questions about the apprenticeship ceremony. However, she didn't mention a single word about Li Mu's streaking in the Changle Palace. If she did not mention it, Li Mu would not take the initiative to mention it either. The two of them reached a tacit understanding about this matter. After the tacit understanding, the Empress said lightly, "Take me to your cave. I want to see my flower garden." Chapter 422. If Li Mu was really guilty, he was willing to accept the punishment of the Great Zhou Law, rather than face this kind of scene every day. The Empress's small building was occupied by Lu Hanyan. She slept on the Empress's bed, and even picked the Empress's flowers. How was Li Mu going to explain this to the Empress? In Changle Palace, Zhou Yi saw that Li Mu was still standing in the same place and said, "Still not opening the door?" Li Mu let out a sigh. With a thought, he appeared in the cave. The Empress's figure also appeared by his side. Zhou Yi was just about to go to his own small building when he found that it was different from the last time he was here. There were 2 more small buildings by the lake. One was unique and elegant, the other was grand and imposing. The grand and imposing building looked like a smaller version of Changle Palace at first glance. It immediately attracted Zhou Yi's attention. Although it was called a small building, it was actually more like a palace. Carved railings, painted rafters, and jade tiles flew. It was particularly conspicuous among the row of small buildings. There was a unique and luxurious air. There were flower beds on both sides of the front of the palace, and a winding path led to a secluded place. In the left flower bed, there was a small pavilion. In the pavilion, there were stone chairs and stone tables. In the right flower bed, there was an ancient tree with a green shade. There was a swing hanging down. The swing was not a simple piece of wood, but an exquisite chair. The chair was carved with hollow patterns. At a glance, one could tell that a lot of effort had been put into it. At first glance, Zhou fell in love with this building. Li Mu secretly glanced at the Empress's expression. He was slightly relieved. Striking while the iron was hot, he said, "Your Majesty, I built this for you." Zhou was surprised. "For me?" Li Mu nodded. "Your Majesty's status is so noble. Only this small building can show your Majesty's status. Your Majesty, please go inside and take a look." Zhou Yi's eyes revealed a satisfied expression. He nodded and said, "Then let's take a look." The two of them walked along the small path in the middle of the flower bed and entered this 3-story building. Li Mu introduced everything to the Empress one by one. "This room is His Majesty's bedchamber. The bedchamber doesn't need to be too big, otherwise, His Majesty won't be able to sleep well. This is a leisure area. In the future, Your Majesty can play chess or cards with Wan and Xiaobai here. This is the kitchen. The area next to it is the dining area." After introducing the first floor, the two of them went to the second floor. The second floor was very spacious, with only a large hall. Li Mu continued, "Your Majesty can use this as a place for seclusion. There are soundproof talismans on all 4 walls, as well as the upper and lower walls. If you cultivate here, you definitely won't be disturbed." Then the two of them went up to the 3rd floor. On the 3rd floor, Li Mu had built a swimming pool. At the front of the pool was a balcony that led outside the room. Li Mu said, "This is a place to take a bath. Before Your Majesty goes to bed at night, you can take a bath here. It will help you sleep. The balcony outside overlooks the lake. You can also lie there and watch the clouds." For this small building, Li Mu had put in a lot of effort. Standing on the balcony of the 3rd floor, he looked at the Empress and asked, "Is Your Majesty satisfied with this place?" Zhou nodded and said, "Not bad. You are very considerate." Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and said, "As long as Your Majesty likes it." Zhou continued, "Okay, now let's go to my small building and have a look." Li Mu's expression froze and he asked, That small building, does Your Majesty still want it?" Zhou said, "That was built by me. Of course I want it." Li Mu wiped his forehead and said, I thought that with this place, Your Majesty would not want that building, so I took the initiative to sleep there for one night. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." Zhou rolled her eyes at him and asked, "You have your own place. Why did you sleep in my place?" Li Mu explained, "Your Majesty, it is because I like Your Majesty's small building very much." Zhou waved her hand and said, "Forget it. Since you like it, I will give it to you. I will go and see my flowers." Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, please." A moment later, in the flower bed in front of the small building, Zhou frowned, pointed to a corner of the flower bed, and asked, "There is a peony missing here. Who picked it?" She also noticed that a peony was missing. Li Mu said nervously, "I was careless." Zhou looked at Li Mu. Her brows gradually relaxed, but in the end, she did not say anything. She walked out of the flower bed and said, "This small building and flower bed, I will give them to you. Take good care of the flower bed. There is a painting in the building that I want to take away. As for the rest, I will give them to you." She walked into the room and stretched out her hand. The painting on the wall floated down and automatically rolled up into her hand. Although Lu Hanyan also liked this painting, but in the future when she asked, Li Mu could say that the Empress lent it to him. In order to make it more believable, he turned to ask the Empress, "Your Majesty, what is the mystery of this painting?" Zhou said, "This is the authentic work of the previous dynasty's master painter, Dao Xianjinren. He entered the Dao through painting. In this painting, there is his painting inheritance. Unfortunately, after the painting was cut off, no one could comprehend it. Li Mu remembered this reason. In the future, when Lu Hanyan asked, he would say that the empress lent it to him to comprehend the painting. Like Taoism and Buddhism, the school of painting was once a cultivation school. However, their lineage had been severed and they had completely disappeared. Until now, the successors of legalism, the school of the military, and Confucianism would occasionally appear, but there was no trace of the successor of the school of painting. Li Mu did not care about this. He had to take a closer look at this painting, so that when he explained it to Lu Hanyan in the future, it would be more believable. Before the empress put it away, Li Mu said, "Your Majesty, can you let me take a look at this painting?" Zhou Yi asked, "This painting has been hanging here for so long. Have you not seen it?" Li Mu said, "I only gave it a few glances." Zhou Yi did not say anything else. He stretched out his hand, and the painting automatically flew up and unfolded once again. Li Mu looked at the painting scroll. This was the first time he looked at this painting carefully. This was actually an ink landscape painting. There were not many elements in the painting. Distant mountains, near water a lone boat, and standing at the bow of the boat was an old man wearing a straw raincoat. Li Mu did not know much about painting. He could only tell that although this painting was simple, it gave people an extremely spacious and distant feeling. However, if he were to say that he comprehended anything from the painting, that was really not the slightest bit. No matter how he looked at it, it was just an ordinary and mediocre landscape painting. Generally speaking, when his heart was the most peaceful, his comprehension was the strongest. Li Mu habitually chanted the clear heart incantation. When he looked at the painting again, he could not help but be shocked. Usually, when he was upset, he would chant the clear heart incantation to calm his heart and qi. However, this time, after he chanted the clear heart incantation, the painting in his eyes became distorted. With just a casual glance, Li Mu felt dazzled. Accompanying this was a wave of dizziness. The more he chanted the clear heart incantation, the more distorted the painting became. In the end, he could only see balls of swirling ink. Li Mu felt that his soul was also swirling. In the next instant, he appeared in a boundless world. Green mountains, clear water, and a lone boat. He stood at the stern of the boat. An old man wearing a straw raincoat stood at the bow of the boat with his back facing him. The old man held a paintbrush in his hand. When Li Mu looked over, the paintbrush moved. The old man held the paintbrush and his wrist moved quickly. It seemed that he was painting in the void. A ball of ink appeared in the air. It seemed to be a swimming fish. The old man's last stroke touched the fish's eye. The fish shook its tail and jumped into the water. The old man's paintbrush continued to move. After a while, a crane twisted its neck and let out a crisp cry. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky. The old man drew a mountain peak with a few strokes. The mountain peak flew into the distance and became a huge mountain peak. The huge mountain peak fell into the water and set off huge waves. It was as if it was going to capsize the small boat. The old man at the bow of the boat continued to draw. He drew a pair of wings. These wings appeared behind him. With two flaps, the old man's body left the boat and flew into the sky. Pa! A huge wave came and capsized the small boat. Li Mu fell into the water. In the next moment, he appeared in the empress's small house again. The painting floated quietly in the air. In the painting, there was still a mountain far away, near the water a lone boat and an old man. Recalling the scene in the illusion, Li Mu was dumbfounded. With just a brush, he could create something out of nothing. Was this the power of a painter? While Li Mu was shocked, Zhou Yi had already walked to the bedside. She turned around and asked Li Mu, "Have you slept here before?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Yes." Zhou Yi bent down and sniffed lightly. Her eyes narrowed and she said, "You are lying to me. This is not your smell." Li Mu opened his mouth and explained, "This." Zhou Yi said coldly, "Think carefully before you speak. You should know what the punishment is for the crime of deceiving the empress." Li Mu said helplessly, "In addition to me, my wife has also slept here." Zhou Yi sniffed again and indeed smelled the scents of two people. One was Lu Hanyan's, and the other was Li Mu's. The two scents were mixed together. In other words, The two of them had occupied her house and slept in her bed. Perhaps Li Mu had even picked a flower from her garden and put it on another woman's head. Zhou Qiong found it hard to imagine what they had done on this bed. She closed her eyes and said, "You can go. I want to be alone for a while." Li Mu sighed. What should come finally came. He wanted to explain, but he did not know what to say. In the end, he could only cup his hands and say, "I will take my leave." As his voice fell, his figure disappeared in an instant. Zhou Yi walked out of the small building, walked to the lakeside, and sat down with her hands on her knees. By the lakeside, a few fish swam around carefreely. When two of the fish swam in front of her, they suddenly stopped and then began to peck each other. Zhou Yi was inexplicably angry. She picked up a stone and threw it into the water. Splash! The stone fell into the water and splashed. The two fish were startled and separated, swimming in different directions. Zhou Yi coldly snorted. "Who asked you to kiss again?" Chapter 423. When Li Mu left the cave, he realized that it was his place. But the Empress took it, so be it. She was the Empress, and he was the one who didn't care about morality. It was only right for him to take a step back. Li Mu had some thoughts about the painting, but he wasn't in the mood to think about it. The Empress wanted to be alone, and Xiaobai and Wanwan were playing somewhere. He had nothing to do, so he took a stroll on the street. Unknowingly, he walked to the Shendu Yamen. Inside the Luoyang Yamen, Wang Wu saw a familiar figure and stood up immediately. He asked in surprise and joy, "Sir Li, what brings you here?" Li Mu asked, "Is Li Si here?" Wang Wu nodded. "Yes, he's in the back office. I'll go inform him now." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Do what you need to do. I'll go find him myself." The Shendu Yamen was Li Si's territory now. Li Si was at the peak of his life. His career and family were both successful. No one would have thought that a small constable in Yangqiu County would have such a position in just 2 years. It was lunchtime. Li Mu picked a restaurant and drank a few cups with Li Si. After 3 rounds of wine, Li Si asked casually, "Where's the boss and Miss Hanyan?" Li Mu said, "They're at Mount Baiyun. They still have some important things to do." Li Mu wanted to drink to drown his sorrows, but the bitter wine made him even more sorrowful. He put down the cup and looked at Li Si again. "I want to ask you something on behalf of a friend." Li Si glanced at him and took a sip of wine. "Speak." Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "This friend of mine did something wrong and hurt another friend of his. He doesn't know how to ask for her forgiveness now." After listening to Li Mu's description, Li Si asked, "Your friend and your friend's friend are the two you mentioned last time, right?" Li Mu nodded. "That's right," Li Si said. "It's been so long. I thought they were already together. Why are they still friends?" Li Mu explained. "It's not the kind of relationship you think." Li Si asked, "If it's not that kind of relationship, would they be together every day and night and even live together?" Li Mu said, "It's because of work." Li Si took a sip of wine and said, "Can't you just end the working relationship as soon as possible? If this continues, won't they be annoyed?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "It's not what you think. My friend has a family." Li Si retorted, "When you had a family, weren't you also with the boss? Is that different?" "What's different? Is she married?" "Not really." "Then what are you afraid of?" "They're not like what you think." "You're not him. How do you know?" Li Si thought for a moment and said, "How about this? From now on, if you're that friend of yours, imagine if that woman gets married. How would you feel?" Li Mu suddenly woke up. Imagine if the Empress had an Empress and concubines. How would he feel? Damn it, if he didn't think about it, he wouldn't know. Now that he thought about it, Li Mu realized that he had such a strong desire to possess the Empress. Of course, he didn't want to possess her body. He wanted to be loved by her. He didn't want to share the Empress's love with a second person. He didn't want a second person to be with her every day. He didn't want her to get hurt for a second person. She even sent her avatar and left the divine capital to save him. The Empress was so good to him, but he became arrogant and hurt the Empress. Thinking about it, it was too much. Li Mu stood up and said, "Drink by yourself." I'll leave first. After leaving the restaurant, Li Mu first used a sound transmission magic treasure to contact Lu Hanyan and Li Qing, who were far away in the North County. He told them which small building in the cave belonged to the Empress. As for the reason, he explained it very clearly. Becoming the Empress of the Great Zhou wasn't her intention. When the Emperor Qi in the ancestral temple condensed, and the Great Zhou had a new emperor, she would retire. She would grow grass and flowers and become their neighbor as an ordinary woman. Different from Li Mu's deduction, Lu Hanyan didn't blame him and didn't make trouble for no reason. Instead, she asked Li Mu to apologize to the Empress on her behalf. This way, Li Mu only needed to obtain the Empress's forgiveness. He slowly sighed and walked toward the palace gate. Changel Palace. Zhou Yi sat on the dragon throne, but she wasn't in the mood to read. Mr. Mei saw that the Empress was unhappy. He stood quietly to the side and didn't say anything. Zhou Yi didn't say much. She snorted and asked, "Mei Wei, what's the punishment for deceiving the Empress according to the law?" Mr. Mei said softly, "Your Majesty, the punishment for deceiving the Empress is execution according to the law." She raised her head and said, "I don't know who is so bold. I'll have someone catch him and bring him back for questioning." Zhou Yi said angrily, "He." She only said one word, then she was discouraged. She shook her head and said, "Forget it." Mr. Mei thought for a moment and asked, "Did Li Mu make your Majesty angry again?" Hearing someone mention it, Zhou Yi felt wronged again. She couldn't help but say, "He gave away the small building I built and my flower garden to others. He even lied to me. Don't you think I should punish him?" Mr. Mei was also angry after hearing this. He said, "You should. Your Majesty is so nice to him. This bastard dared to do this to your Majesty. I'll catch him and give him 100 beatings." Zhou Yi hesitated and said, "You don't have to punish him so severely, do you?" Mr. Mei said, "He should be taught a lesson." Zhou Yi sighed and said, "Forget it. I'm not related to him. It's normal for him to be nice to his wife." Mr. Mei was even more indignant. He said loudly, "Your Majesty is so nice to him. You dote on him and protect him. When the tributes from the counties arrived, he was the first one you thought of. This is how he repaid your Majesty. No, I can't take this lying down. If I don't teach him a lesson, I'll be ashamed of myself and your Majesty." At this time, Shangguanli walked in and said, "Your Majesty, Li Mu wants to see you." Lord Mei said coldly, "Let him wait outside for 2 hours before coming in." Zhou Yi hesitated. She was about to speak when she said firmly, "Your Majesty, you can't protect him this time." Zhou Yi thought for a while and nodded. She sat on the dragon throne with a hesitant expression. After a few minutes, she looked outside the hall and said, "Come in." Mr. Mei looked helpless, but he could only watch Li Mu walk into the hall. She looked at Li Mu fiercely and asked, "How dare you come here?" Li Mu ignored Mr. Mei and looked at the Empress. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I'm guilty." Zhou Yi looked surprised. She coughed and put on a dignified expression. She asked, "What are you guilty of?" Li Mu said sincerely, "I shouldn't have lied to your Majesty. I shouldn't have slept in your Majesty's pavilion without your Majesty's permission. Please punish me, your Majesty." Mr. Mei snorted and said, "The crime of lying to the Empress is punishable by death. Do you think a small punishment can make up for your crime?" Zhou Yi stood up from the dragon throne and said lightly, "It's good that you know you're wrong. Just don't do it again." Lord Mei stared blankly at the Empress with a blank expression. Li Mu bowed and said, "Thank you, your Majesty." Soon Li Mu, Shangguanli, and Mr. Mei walked out of the Changel Palace together. Li Mu turned to Mr. Mei as soon as he stepped out of the gate. He said with disappointment, "Sister Mei, I called you sister so many times. How could you treat me like this in front of Her Majesty? You disappoint me." Li Mu shook his head and left. Mr. Mei stood there for a long time. Then he turned to look at Shangguanli and said seriously, "I swear if I say another word I'll be a dog." Chapter 424. One should learn from one's mistakes. If one had to use countless lies to cover up a lie, it would be better to be honest from the beginning. After getting a new residence, The Empress generously gave the small building to Li Mu. This incident ended without any mishaps. However, Mr. May's behavior disappointed him. The two of them had such a deep friendship, but he actually fanned the flames in front of the Empress. Li Mu needed to reconsider their friendship. Li Mu was full of apologies to the Empress. The Empress was very good to him, and Li Mu seemed to be using her kindness to do whatever he wanted, ignoring her feelings. Even if he was favored, he couldn't be fearless. A relationship had to be maintained for a long time, and it had to be mutual. If he relied on her to do whatever he wanted, he would only end up with nothing. This was the conclusion that Li Mu had come to after observing countless relationships. Fortunately, the Empress was magnanimous, and Lu Hanyan was tolerant. Baiyun Mountain. Main Peak. Li Qing looked at Lu Hanyan's melancholy expression and asked, "Sister, what's wrong?" Lu Hanyan sighed and said, "I'm a little regretful now." Li Qing asked, "What do you regret?" Lu Hanyan said, "How great would it have been if I had stayed with him in the North County." The next day, outside Chang'e Palace. Mr. May and Shangguan Li stood outside the palace, occasionally glancing inside. Li Mu had walked into Chang'e Palace for 2 hours. He didn't know what he had to say to the Empress. They hadn't finished talking for 2 whole hours. Yesterday, he wanted nothing more than to behead him. Today he was being lovey-dovey again. Maydarin sighed. She had watched His Majesty grow up. She thought she understood His Majesty very well. However, she didn't know when it started, but she couldn't guess His Majesty's thoughts. In Chang'e Palace, Li Mu was actually playing aeroplane chess with the Empress. This was a game that Wanwan and Xiao Bai often played. They often used this game to decide who would sleep in Li Mu at night. The Empress was with them every day, and she had also learned this new form of entertainment. Li Mu took the initiative to admit his mistake, and the Empress also forgave him. The relationship between monarch and subject returned to how it was before. At this time, Li Mu finally had the mood to talk to her about the painting. Zhou Yi threw the dice and asked, "Have you comprehended the mystery of that painting?" Li Mu nodded and described the scene he saw in the painting. Zhou Yi was silent for a moment, and said slowly, "Reverend Daoxian indeed hid the art of painting in that painting. Thousands of years ago, when the 100 schools of thought were contending, the art of painting used the art of creating something from nothing, and it was also one of the best in the 100 schools of thought. However, after the death of Reverend Daoxian, the art of painting lost its inheritance. This is the only painting left behind by Reverend Daoxian. Later generations only guessed that perhaps the mystery of painting was hidden in this painting, but I didn't expect it to be true." Li Mu thought of those scenes, and said with some shock, "With such a mysterious art of creating something from nothing, weren't the art cultivators back then invincible?" Zhou Yi shook her head and said, "In the path of cultivation, who dares to say that they are invincible? Legalism cultivators can say that they are the law, but they are not invincible in the world. Every path has its strengths and weaknesses, and there is no true invincibility. Although each path of cultivation has its strengths and weaknesses, but if one cultivates all paths, one can learn from the strong points to make up for the weak points, and might not be invincible." At this moment, Zhou Yi stretched out her hand, a white light flashed, and the painting appeared in her hand again. She handed the painting to Li Mu and said, "Since you can comprehend the inheritance of Reverend Daoxian, this painting is for you, and you can slowly comprehend it." Li Mu took the painting and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." An hour later, Li Mu walked out of the Chang'e Palace with the painting in his hand. "Stop." He had only taken 2 steps when Mr. May's voice came from behind him. Li Mu stopped, turned around and asked, "What's the matter?" Mr. May walked up and knocked on his head. "You're all grown up now, and you don't even call me sister anymore." Li Mu glanced at her and asked, "Is there a sister who would risk her life to kill her brother?" Mr. May's face darkened and he said, "Don't mention this to me again." Li Mu was just saying, Mr. May watched the Empress grow up, and he must be closer to her than Li Mu. Just based on this, not to mention her, even Li Mu himself felt sorry for the Empress. Mr. May glanced at him, and saw the thing in his hand and said in shock, "Her Majesty actually gave this painting to you?" Li Mu looked at the painting in his hand, and asked, "Is there a problem?" Mr. May's expression was complicated, and he said, Her Majesty liked painting when she was young, and she admired the painter Reverend Daoxian very much. This is the only authentic work of Reverend Daoxian, and also Her Majesty's favorite painting, and it was the betrothal gift that the late emperor gave to the Zhou family. She was a little emotional, and said, Her Majesty actually gave her favorite thing to you. From the way the Empress purposely took this painting away from the small building, it was obvious that she really liked this painting, but she still gave it to him without hesitation. Li Mu was touched, and the guilt in his heart deepened. He walked aimlessly to the Luoyang Yamen, and Li Si saw him, and immediately said, Next time you treat me to a drink, pay the bill first. Li Mu waved his hand and said, This time I'm not here to treat you to a drink, I have a question to ask you. Li Si said indifferently, That friend of yours is in trouble again. Li Mu nodded, and said, Under what circumstances would a person give her favorite thing to you? Li Si glanced at him and said, If a person is willing to give her favorite thing to you, then that thing is not her favorite thing, but you. Li Si looked at Li Mu, and said word by word, You are her favorite thing. When Li Mu left the Luoyang Yamen, he had a lot on his mind. Was it like Li Si said, that he was the Empress' favorite thing? Li Mu was sure that the Empress liked him. In the eyes of others, he was originally the Empress' favorite official. The Empress was his solid backing. He was in front of the Empress, charging and breaking through enemy lines for her, solving problems for her. This kind of official deserved to be more favored. Although he was not as good as Li Si, he was not an idiot who did not know anything about love. Wasn't the Empress being too nice to him a little too much? It was his first time being someone's official, and he did not know what a favorite official should be like. Moreover, as an insider, Li Mu could not answer this question himself. He decided to find an outsider to ask. Mr. May was undoubtedly the best choice. He was the Empress' favorite official, and he knew the Empress best, as well as the relationship between him and the Empress. Li Mu took her to a place far away and set up a soundproof array. Mr. May looked around and said angrily, Why are you being so secretive? Li Mu asked, Sister May, do you think Her Majesty treats me well? As soon as he said that, he was hit on the head. You're so heartless. How dare you doubt Her Majesty treats you well? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? Let me tell you, you can doubt anyone but Her Majesty. If Her Majesty doesn't treat you well, no one else in the world will treat you well. Li Mu did not get an answer from Mr. May. Instead, he was beaten up. He was extremely suspicious that she was abusing her power to avenge a private grudge. At the gate of the Zongjing Temple, Zhang Chun and Prince Shou watched from afar. They did not come up until Mr. May left. Zhang Chun asked, How did you offend Mr. May? Nothing. Li Mu rubbed his head and asked Zhang Chun casually, Mr. Zhang, do you think Her Majesty treats me well? Zhang Chun stopped and slowly looked at Li Mu saying, Mr. Li, you must have a conscience. How could you doubt? How dare you doubt Her Majesty treats you well? Li Mu explained. That's not what I meant, Zhang Chun asked. Then what do you mean? Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, I mean, how did the former emperor treat his favorite officials, compared to Her Majesty's treatment of me? Zhang Chun shook his head and said, I wasn't an official at that time, how would I know? Prince Shou glanced at Li Mu and said lightly, How can the former emperor's favorite officials be compared to you? The former emperor didn't treat you as well as Her Majesty did. Chapter 425. In Li Mu's era, the feudal dynasty had long ceased to exist. He didn't know how the ancient emperors treated their favored officials. He knew how the emperors treated their concubines. King Zhou was obsessed with Daji's beauty. King Yu of Zhou played with the warlords with the beacon fire just to make Baoxi smile. And Emperor Ming of Tang doted on Yang Guifei. In the future, everyone knew about their deeds. King Shou's words woke Li Mu up. In some people's eyes, he was no longer a favored official, but someone like Bao Mo and Daji. Li Mu knew that the Empress treated him well, but he didn't see it as clearly as King Shou and the others. It turned out that the Empress treated him so well. The Empress was the kind of person who would return the favor tenfold if someone treated her well. If Li Mu was a woman, it wouldn't be a big deal. The Empress treated Shangguanli very well too. However, he was a man. If the Empress treated him too well, it would cause people to criticize him. However, Li Mu never cared about other people's criticism. Since he came to Shindu, the criticism never stopped. He didn't care about these people's criticism. He only cared about the Empress's feelings. After returning to the Li residence, Li Mu looked at the scroll in his hand. After thinking for a long time, he took out a sound transmission instrument and said, "Chen Shi, help me investigate something." Changle Palace. Zhou Yi leaned on the dragon throne with a book in her hand. After reading a page, she realized that something was missing. She asked Mr. Mei, "Where's Li Mu?" Li Mu was late, but the Empress couldn't help but ask. Mr. Mei sighed and said, "Your Majesty, he didn't come to the palace today." Not long after, Xiao Bai and Wanwan ran in. Wanwan brought a stick of candied fruit for Zhou Yi and said, "Young master asked us to tell Sister Zhou that he has something to do in the North County. He will return to Shindu in a few days." Zhou Yi stood up and frowned. "Didn't he just go to the North County?" Xiao Bai looked disappointed and said, "Benefactor didn't take us with him either." Zhou Yi looked at the stacked memorials on the table and took out a spirit conch. After activating it, he asked, "Why did you go to North Prefecture? Do you still care about the Imperial Court and the Secretariat?" Within the spirit snail, Li Mu's voice was mixed with the sound of the wind. "Your Majesty, Mount Baiyun has summoned me urgently, so I have no choice but to return. I will explain everything to your Majesty when I return to Fairy's capital. I am still on my way, so let's talk later." After that, there was no more sound from the spirit snail. Zhou Yi put away the spiritual snail, gritted his teeth and said, "What urgent summons from Mount Baiyun? Do you think I don't know why you're here? Men are all the same. Once they get married, they forget everything. Back then, you swore that you would be loyal to me and would go through fire and water without hesitation. Now, when I need you, you can't even see me." A month passed in the blink of an eye. During this month, the morning court was still held every 3 days. Although the morning court wasn't dull, there weren't any major changes. Without Li Mu, the old and new parties had been quiet for a long time after being defeated by Li Mu. The courtiers had long gotten used to the days without Li Mu. The current imperial court was very different from before. The influence of the old and new parties was not as strong as before. The Empress had absolute control over the imperial court, especially the officials led by the left assistant minister of personnel, Zhang Chun. They gradually formed a force. These people held real power and had a lot of say in the imperial court. They didn't belong to any of the old and new parties, and were only loyal to the Empress. Although Li Mu wasn't in the imperial court, the Great Zhou imperial court was still under his shadow. The people of Fairy's capital hadn't seen Li Mu in a long time. However, as time passed, Li Mu's reputation among the people didn't decrease. Instead, it increased. This half a year was the most comfortable half a year for the people of Fairy's capital in the past few decades. Everything the people of Fairy's capital had today was given to them by one person. He gave the people dignity, justice, and hope for their lives. In the past, Fairy's capital was lifeless. Today, Fairy's capital was filled with boundless vitality. For the past few days, the people in the streets of the Fairy's capital, whether it was the main street or the small alleys, would wake up early and clean the streets in front of their houses. After sweeping, they would rinse the streets with clean water, not leaving a speck of dust or a single leaf. Those who littered on the streets didn't need the authorities. Any commoner who saw them would go forward to stop them. The children of the officials of Fairy's capital didn't dare to ride on horses in Fairy's capital. Even if they rode in carriages or sedan chairs, they had to use roads specially designed for carriages and horses. Those who violated the rules would be severely punished. In just half a month, the entire Fairy's capital became orderly. Of course, part of the reason for this was the intervention of the authorities. However, the commoners didn't object to this. This year was the year when the countries of the Zhou continent paid tribute. From this month onwards, the envoys of the small countries in the south would arrive in Fairy's capital. As citizens of Great Zhou, they had a strong sense of pride. They didn't want to embarrass Great Zhou in front of these small countries. Great Zhou, which was born in the hinterland of Zhongjuan, used to have enemies. However, after the martial emperor, Great Zhou had almost unified the Zhou continent. The remaining small countries in the south also respected Great Zhou. They paid tribute every 5 years in exchange for Great Zhou's protection. This was the first time the various countries paid tribute since the empress ascended the throne. It was even more important to show them the majesty of a great country. 2 men walked on the streets of Fairy's capital. The young man kept looking around as he walked. He sighed and said, "Shangzhou is indeed Shangzhou. This is the most prosperous, most imposing, and cleanest city I've ever seen." The other middle-aged man shook his head and said in a low voice, "It's only bright on the surface. You have no idea what kind of life the commoners live here are living. What kind of darkness lies beneath all this brightness?" The young man looked around and said doubtfully, "But it looks like they're living a good life." The middle-aged man said faintly, "It's all an act. Every year, the Great Zhou court does this. After the tribute, everything goes back to normal." The young man looked carefully again and shook his head. "I don't think they're faking it. Some things can't be faked. You're still young. There are some things you can't see through." The middle-aged man looked at the commoners of Great Zhou who walked past him. His lips moved, but he didn't say anything else. The last time he came to Fairy's capital, it was during the reign of the previous emperor. At that time, Fairy's capital looked brighter on the surface than it was now. However, the commoners of Great Zhou had faces full of numbness and despair. It left a deep impression on him. However, when he came to Fairy's capital again today, it was still the same Fairy's capital. However, the commoners of Great Zhou didn't seem to be the commoners of Great Zhou of the past. The numbness and despair on their faces were no longer there. Instead, it was replaced by smiles from the bottom of their hearts. Every commoner's eyes were shining. Was this still the Fairy's capital he knew? The middle-aged man was shocked. He muttered, "What happened here in the past 5 years?" At a tea stall by the roadside, a few passers-by were drinking tea and chatting. "I wonder where Lord Li went. I haven't seen him in a long time. It's been a long time. The last time I saw him was a month ago. Lord Li just got married not long ago. He should be accompanying his wife. We're all experienced people. We can understand. Lord Li will probably come back. I feel uneasy when he's not in Fairy's capital." "Me too. If I don't greet Lord Li every few days, I feel like something is missing. With Lord Li around, there's more to life." A middle-aged man sat by the tea stall. He looked at them and asked curiously, "Excuse me, who is this Lord Li you're talking about?" The few of them looked surprised. They exclaimed, "You don't know Lord Li?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "We're not from here. We don't know much about Fairy's capital." One of them poured him a cup of tea and said, "Even if you're not from here, it's impossible that you haven't heard of Lord Li. This won't do. I have to explain it to you today." Just as he was about to speak, his body suddenly trembled. He looked ahead. A figure was walking on the street. The commoners crowded around him and greeted him warmly. He hurriedly stood up and waved with a smile. "Lord Li, you're back." Beside the tea stall, 2 figures looked at the young man who was surrounded by the commoners of Fairy's capital. They looked surprised. Li Mu stayed on the street for a long time before he finally entered the palace. At the entrance of Changel Palace, he asked Mr. Mei, "Is His Majesty here?" Mr. Mei gave him a look, telling him to be careful later. Li Mu walked into Changel Palace. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Your Majesty." Zhou Yi was reviewing memorials. He didn't even raise his head. He said calmly, "It's only been a month. Why didn't you spend more time with your wife on Mount Baiyun? Why did you come back to Fairy's capital?" Li Mu said, "Your Majesty's birthday is coming soon. I have a few gifts for Your Majesty." Zhou Yi finally raised his head. He asked in surprise, "How do you know my birthday?" Li Mu smiled. "Mr. Mei told me." Zhou Yi coughed softly. He asked, "What gifts?" Li Mu stretched out his hand. A few scrolls appeared in his palm. With a thought, the scrolls floated into the air and slowly opened. Zhou Yi took a look and was stunned. She didn't care about her manners. She stood up and said in shock, "Shinran Daoxian's authentic works. There's only one of his authentic works. Where did you find so many?" Li Mu lowered his head. He said, "It's just a coincidence." Zhou looked at him. He counted with his fingers and said in disbelief, "You dug up his tomb?" Chapter 426. Li Mu was taken aback. The Empress could even predict this? He had a sudden thought. Reverend Daoxian was known as the art saint. Among his authentic works, there should at least be a few that were buried with him. As long as they could find his tomb, they would be able to find his authentic works. As the Grand Elder of Corpse Sect, it was normal for him to lead Corpse Sect disciples to rob tombs. Moreover, to the Corpse Sect disciples, there was nothing deeper than robbing tombs together and fighting big dumplings together. In this 1 month, he had shortened the distance between him and the disciples of the Corpse Sect to a great extent, and had also completely gained their trust. However, finding the art saint's tomb was far more difficult than Li Mu had imagined. Reverend Daoxian was an ancient from the previous dynasty. He had fallen more than 1,000 years ago. There were very few records about him. With the help of the Corpse Sect disciples, Li Mu spent almost a month to find his tomb. It was also thanks to the Corpse Sect. They were not good at other things, but digging tombs was something that every Corpse Sect disciple was familiar with. In order to steal strong corpses to refine corpses, they had to be proficient in feng shui knowledge. This was very useful for exploring tombs. An outstanding Corpse Sect disciple was definitely an outstanding feng shui master. A skilled feng shui master did not even need to consult ancient books. They only needed to use their eyes to see if there was an ancient tomb in a place. Based on the feng shui of the tomb, they could determine the position or strength of the corpse of Mu Zhong when he was alive. Reverend Daoxian was the last painting master. After him, the art of painting was cut off. In these years, countless people had searched for his tomb. Naturally, there was a lot of information about this. However, after 1,000 years, no one had found it. The Corpse Sect had searched for it before. However, everyone knew that Reverend Daoxian, the art saint, had dismembered himself before he fell. His tomb was only a cenotaph. This, to the Corpse Sect, was naturally boring. Many years ago, they spent a lot of effort but still could not find his tomb. The Corpse Sect gave up immediately. After all, there were more strong warriors' tombs waiting for them to explore. This time, the members of the Corpse Sect had searched for an entire month. They didn't know how many tombs they had snuck into and investigated before they finally found the tomb of the art saint. The dignified art saint, a powerhouse of his generation, had actually built his tomb in such a simple and crude manner. Ordinary people would probably think that it was a commoner's tomb. This was also the reason why no one had ever found this tomb in the past 1,000 years. If it wasn't for the fact that Li Mu just happened to have an authentic painting of the painting saint in his possession that produced a subtle connection with the objects buried with the tomb, Li Mu would probably have missed it as well. Looking at the Empress's shocked expression, Li Mu said with a straight face, "I am doing this for the inheritance of the art Dao. I believe that Senior Art Saint won't blame me. Besides, there are no remains in his tomb, so it isn't considered an offense." "Oh right, whose paintings does your majesty like? I will send people to dig them up." The people of the Corpse Sect are very good at finding and robbing tombs. Mr. May stood in the middle of the hall with a stunned expression on his face. Damn it, this was clearly a very disappointing matter. Why did it sound so sweet when it came from Li Mu's mouth? After Zhou Yi came back to her senses, she hurriedly said, No need." Then, she suddenly realized something. Looking at Li Mu, she asked, "Could it be that you weren't at Mount Baiyun this month?" Li Mu still said with some trepidation, "The tomb of the art saint is not easy to find. It was just a coincidence that I almost wasted a month of effort. Fortunately, I managed to find it before your majesty's birthday." Zhou Yi was slightly delighted, but her expression was still dignified. She said, "The tomb is full of dangers. Have you forgotten what happened in the White Emperor's cave? Don't do such dangerous things in the future." Li Mu nodded repeatedly. "I will do as you command." Zhou Yi said lightly, "Go to the back hall. Xiao Bai and Wanwan have been thinking about you all day." Li Mu bowed and said, "I will take my leave now." When Li Mu turned and walked into the back hall, the solemnity on Zhou Yi's face disappeared. She admired the few authentic works of the art saint, and the corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up slightly. Mr. May walked forward and explained, "Your Majesty, I didn't tell him Your Majesty's birthday. He must have heard about it from somewhere else. This rascal, he didn't care about court affairs for a month just to flatter Your Majesty. He is becoming more and more immature. No wonder people are talking about him behind his back." Joey nodded deeply and said, "Keep an eye on him. Don't let him fool around anymore." Mr. May raised his head and looked at the Empress. Even his eyes were smiling. He could only say helplessly, "I know." In the back hall of Changel Palace, Li Mu hugged Xiaobai and spun around. He gave Wanwan the same treatment. Wanwan hugged his arm and looked at him pitifully. She said, "Sir, next time, wherever you go, can you bring us along?" If Li Mu was going to play, of course, he would bring them along. But this time he was going to dig up graves. How could he bring two delicate little girls along? But looking at Wanwan's eyes, he couldn't say no. He could only say, "Okay, I promise you. In the future, if I can bring you along, I will try my best." "I haven't seen you for a month. Let me check your cultivation first." Wanwan raised her head and said proudly, "I am already at the 4th realm." Although Wanwan's talent was average, she had the Empress's support and had endless cultivation resources. In addition, with the Empress's guidance, her cultivation had already reached the theurgy level at a young age. Because of Lingtong, her strength was far beyond the theurgy level. If ordinary creation realm cultivators didn't pay attention, they would also be bewitched by her. Xiaobai's talent wasn't low. Before Li Mu left, she had already advanced to the 5-tailed realm. In this month, her cultivation didn't improve at all. Firstly, she was like Li Mu. Her cultivation was forcefully raised. If she didn't accumulate enough, it would be very difficult for her cultivation to improve. Unless she encountered a great opportunity, it would be very difficult for her to improve in a short time. Under normal circumstances, the Fox clan needed decades to advance from the 5-tailed realm to the 6-tailed realm. And 99% of the 5-tailed foxes would never be able to cross this hurdle in their lifetime. Now, Xiaobai wasn't just facing the problem of stagnation in her cultivation. She still lacked the cultivation method after the 5-tailed realm. Xiaobai's grandmother only had the cultivation method of the Fox clan before the 5th realm. If she wasn't of the Fox clan, Li Mu, who had the Demon clan's heavenly book, could provide her with the cultivation method from the 5th realm to the 9th realm. However, the Fox clan's cultivation method was independent of the Demon clan. Li Mu couldn't provide her with any help. Li Mu wasn't the only one who couldn't. The Empress couldn't either. The Fox clan's cultivation method was only passed down to the Fox clan, unless they found a 5th realm fox demon. Li Mu knew a 5th realm fox demon, and she owed him a favor. In principle, Li Mu could ask for her favor and pave the way for Xiaobai's cultivation. However, Phantom Princess was his enemy. It was very likely that he didn't ask for her favor and would end up losing his own life. Moreover, this wasn't a long-term solution. Even if he had the cultivation method for the 5th realm, he still didn't know anything about the 6th realm. When Xiaobai's cultivation level increased, she would encounter the same problem. Actually, there was another way. That was to let Xiaobai cultivate the ordinary demon Dao. She was already at the 5th realm, and had already surpassed consciousness opening, fetus molding, and transfiguration. She only needed 1 or 2 years to condense a demon core. However, this way, her identity as a Fox clan member would be wasted. Even if her cultivation level increased, her mantissa wouldn't increase, and she wouldn't have the Fox clan's talent. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Li Mu wouldn't let her take this path. If she could obtain the Fox clan's heavenly book from the Illusion Lord, Xiaobai's cultivation would be smooth sailing. However, it wasn't easy to steal a treasure from a fox's mouth. He could only find another opportunity in the future. Li Mu stroked Xiaobai's head and said, "Don't worry. I'll find the cultivation method for you after the 5th realm as soon as possible." After accompanying Xiaobai and Wanwan for a while, they went to play by themselves. Li Mu stayed in the room alone. He stretched out his hand and a brush appeared in his hand. This brush was found by Li Mu in the painting sage's cenotaph. This brush was identical to the brush used by the old man at the bow of the boat in the painting. It was likely an item belonging to the painting sage. However, Li Mu couldn't create something out of nothing with this brush. This meant that the profundity of this art lay in the caster, and not the brush. This was a large part of the reason why the painting Tao was cut off. Be it the Buddhist Tao, the demonic Tao, or the ghost Tao, it was very easy to gain a rudimentary understanding of cultivation. All one needed to do was cultivate step by step. Therefore, they were able to endure for so long. For artists and musicians, to gain a rudimentary understanding of their arts, one had to have superb artistic attainments. Just this alone was enough to keep most people at bay. Without anyone cultivating it, it wasn't surprising that the heritage was cut off. However, no matter how difficult this path was, Li Mu had to give it a try. The painting sage's divine power of painting in the void gave Li Mu a great deal of inspiration. The painting Tao could create something out of nothing. If he used the same method to draw talismans, wouldn't he be able to save talisman materials and condense talismans in the void? Li Mu thought about it carefully and felt that this idea was very feasible. If he wanted to cultivate the painting Tao, he had to start by learning how to draw. This was also the first time Li Mu realized that he didn't have any artistic talent. With his cultivation, he could control every muscle in his body, including his hands. However, drawing required more than just the control of the body. It was the same landscape painting, but Li Mu had imitated Dao Xian's authentic work. On the surface, there was not much difference between the two paintings, but when one compared them, one would have to wonder what exactly he had painted in the room. Li Mu looked at a new painting on the table and frowned. The Empress walked in from outside and asked, "What are you doing?" Li Mu said, "Your Majesty, can you help me take a look and see what's wrong with this painting of mine? It has form but no spirit. You haven't gained a rudimentary understanding of it." Zhou glanced at it and said lightly. She then asked, "You want to learn to draw?" Li Mu nodded and said, "It seems that I can't just draw blindly. I have to find someone to guide me." "Who should I find?" The Empress looked at the painting and coughed lightly. Li Mu suddenly looked at the Empress, and his eyes lit up. He was really stupid. The person who could teach him how to draw was so close and so far away. He looked at the Empress and said, "The painting skills of the painters in the palace are definitely not bad. Can I have them teach me how to draw?" Chapter 427. In the back hall of Changel Palace, Zhou fell silent after hearing Li Mu's words. Li Mu saw that she didn't answer for a long time and couldn't help but ask, "Your Majesty, can't I?" Zhou glanced at him and said lightly, "Yes, but there are many rules for painters in the palace. Even if you want to learn, they may not be willing to teach you. If they don't want to, I can't force them." Li Mu nodded and said, "Of course. If they don't want to, I can only find someone else." Zhou walked to the front hall and glanced at Mr. Mei. She said, "Mei Wei, go to the secretary department and find a painter to teach Li Mu how to paint. Say it's under my orders." Mr. Mei bowed and said, "Yes, Your Majesty." Zhou added, "If the painter doesn't want to, don't force him." Mr. Mei looked up at her and met her eyes. He nodded and said, "I understand." Li Mu wanted to choose his own teacher. He walked to Mr. Mei and said, "I'll go with you." "You stay." Zhou Qiong glanced at him and said in an unquestionable tone, "As an official of the imperial court, you left your post without my permission for more than a month. I haven't punished you yet. You stand here for 15 minutes and reflect." "Yes, Your Majesty." Li Mu sighed, and obediently stood where he was. Although he had wanted to give the Empress a surprise, and at the same time, try to find an inheritance of the art Tao, he had also violated the rules of the imperial court, and should be punished. Moreover, he wasn't a primary school student. Standing for 15 minutes wasn't a punishment at all. Li Mu stood in the hall. Zhou didn't sit down. She walked to him and said, "In addition, without my permission, you're not allowed to dig people's graves. If there's a next time, it won't be as simple as standing." Li Mu said sincerely, "I know my mistake." No matter what, entering someone else's tomb was always immoral. Moreover, it was disrespectful to the dead. He was not Thousand Illusions and did not really like this. With the Empress's permission, for example, entering the White Emperor cave and getting the page of the Tomes of Arcane was a reasonable archaeological excavation. Or for the sake of passing down the painting doctrine, visiting the tomb of the painting saint from 1,000 years ago was justifiable. In order to unravel the mysteries of the ancient era and explore the ancient history, it was not only the demonic Tao, but also the righteous Tao cultivators. If there were similar situations in the future, he could just apply to her first. In Changel Palace, Li Mu stood obediently as punishment. In the Secretary Province, Mr. May had already summoned 3 court painters. Although their cultivations weren't high, they were all existences standing at the pinnacle of Great Zhou's painting and calligraphy world. They represented the pinnacle of Great Zhou's art. An old man bowed and asked, "What orders do you have, sir?" Lord May said indifferently, "You are the most experienced and skilled painters in the palace. Li Mu, the Imperial Secretariat's official, is currently learning how to paint. He wants to find one of you to teach him." The white-haired old man stepped forward and said, "I admire Sir Li's actions very much. I'm willing to use all my life's knowledge to teach Sir Li painting skills." The other middle-aged man didn't dare to show weakness and said, "It's my honor to teach Sir Li. I'm also willing to teach him all my painting skills." The last young man said, "If Sir Li is interested in painting women, you can come to me at any time." Mr. May glanced at them and asked, "Your painting skills can't be easily taught to outsiders, so no one will teach him, understand?" The old man was puzzled and asked, "Why?" The middle-aged man was surprised and said, "Our master didn't set such a rule." The young man was puzzled and asked, "Why is that?" Mr. May said coldly, "You don't have to ask why. If Li Mu asks, just say so. If anyone wants to teach him, they don't have to come tomorrow." The 3 men's expressions became serious and they immediately spoke. "Yes, sir." "Understood." "Understood." After Lord May left, the 3 of them looked at each other with puzzled expressions. One moment he's allowed to teach, the next moment he's not. Is he going to teach or not? Of course not. Didn't you hear what Commander May said at the end? Whoever dares to teach him can pack up and go home tomorrow. Let's listen to Commander May. She's by His Majesty's side. Her wishes are His Majesty's wishes. We can't go against his orders. If he wants to teach, then teach. If he doesn't want to teach, then don't teach. What is His Majesty playing at? Oh right, I remember that His Majesty also likes painting. The Art Saint's original work is in His Majesty's hands. If he doesn't want us to teach him, does His Majesty want to teach him himself? Shu, be careful with your words. Changel Palace. Li Mu had been standing there for 15 minutes. He was eating the grapes given by the Empress while waiting for Mr. May to return. Li Mu was quite confident about this matter. Although many people in Fairy's capital didn't like him, there were even more people who liked him. He wasn't loved by everyone, but with his status, it shouldn't be a problem to hire a few court painters to teach him painting. Moreover, the Empress had given him a verbal order not to force them. It was just a casual remark. Everyone knew that the Empress favored him the most. If anyone dared to refuse, they wouldn't have to come to work tomorrow. Soon, footsteps could be heard outside Changel Palace. Mr. May walked in and bowed. "Your Majesty, none of the 3 painters are willing to teach him." Li Mu was stunned. Then he asked in disbelief, "Why?" Lord May explained, "They said that their painting skills are not taught to outsiders, so they can't teach you." Zhou Yi glanced at Li Mu and said calmly, "Since they have such a rule, I can't force them. You'd better find someone else." Li Mu couldn't accept this fact. He personally went to the Secretary Province and found the 3 painters. The old man said apologetically, "Lord Li, I'm really sorry. Please forgive me for not being able to help you. I once swore to the heavens that I wouldn't teach my painting skills to anyone else. Otherwise, I'd be struck by lightning and die a horrible death." Li Mu looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man immediately said, "Same for me." The young man also immediately said, "Same for me." Li Mu shook his head and said disappointedly, "I finally know why the art of painting was cut off. If the painters in the past were like you, it would be strange if the art of painting didn't change. Li Mu had been curious before. Taoism was easy to get started with, and it was easy to get started with it. Furthermore, it was open to the public and did not hide anything. It served them right to flourish. Even if it was harder to learn the art of painting, could it be harder than legalism? Nowadays, legalism still appeared often, but there were no painters. This might be the reason. However, Li Mu couldn't force others to follow this rule. At most, he could only lament their misfortune and be angry at their incompetence. After returning from the Secretary Province, Mr. May suddenly said, "Why don't you let Her Majesty teach you?" Li Mu was stunned. He asked, "Does Her Majesty know how to paint?" Mr. May rolled his eyes and said, "Why do you think Her Majesty likes to collect the works of the art saint? Her Majesty has liked to paint since she was young. Her painting skills are comparable to the top painters in the palace." Li Mu knew that the Empress liked to play with flowers and plants. He had known her for so long, but he had never seen her paint. However, there was no need for Sir May to lie to him about such things. How could a person who didn't know anything about painting like a painting be his favorite thing? Moreover, when the Empress had commented on his painting, she had seemed to be quite professional. Li Mu sighed softly. He felt like he had searched for her thousands of times in the crowd, but when he looked back, she was in the dim light. It was just that the light was too dazzling, and Li Mu didn't notice it for a moment. It turned out that the Empress was the person he had been looking for. Changle Palace. Wanwan looked at the table full of dishes and said in surprise, "What's the occasion today? Why are there so many dishes?" Xiaobai looked and said, "They all seem to be Sister Zhou's favorite." Wanwan said, "I like them too." Xiaobai muttered, "As long as it's edible you like it." Li Mu patted their heads and said, "Today is your Sister Zhou's birthday." Every dish on the table was made by Li Mu himself, and they were all the Empress's favorites. He hadn't made so many dishes for a long time. This time, he had to be more attentive since he had a favor to ask. After eating and drinking, the two lively girls went out to digest. Li Mu looked at the Empress and asked with a smile, "Are these dishes to your liking, Your Majesty?" Zhou nodded and said, "Yes, you are very considerate." Li Mu struck while the iron was hot and said, "Your Majesty, I have a presumptuous request." Zhou said indifferently, "What is it?" "Say it." Li Mu raised his head and said, "Mr. May said that Your Majesty's painting skills are unparalleled. I would like to ask Your Majesty to teach me how to paint." Zhou thought for a moment and said, "For the sake of these dishes I agree. Mei Wei, prepare the brush and ink." Ever since you came to the palace, everything has changed. In the past, the emperor could only go to the royal garden after morning court. He had no time to paint. Sometimes when I patrolled late at night, I could still see the emperor sitting on the roof. Li Mu rolled his eyes at her and said, "Isn't it because the things that should have been done by His Majesty have been done by me these days? Otherwise, His Majesty wouldn't have so much free time." Mr. May smiled and said, "That's why. If only you had entered the palace 3 years earlier. If you had entered the palace 3 years earlier, the emperor wouldn't have had to suffer these 3 years. 3 years ago, Li Mu wasn't Li Mu yet, so such a possibility didn't exist. For the current Li Mu, if he had to deal with memorials every day, he would also be annoyed. It was better to help the empress complete her great cause, and then live in seclusion in the fields, planting vegetables and flowers. In the past year, the faith of the people in the 36 counties of the Great Zhou had almost doubled compared to a few years ago. In terms of governance, the only emperor in the history of the Great Zhou who could compare to the empress was Emperor Wen. If the current policy was maintained, and the people were allowed to recuperate for 10 years, surpassing Emperor Wen wouldn't be difficult. In these 10 years, the faith of the people in the Great Zhou would gradually stabilize and wouldn't increase too much. In this way, the nurturing of the emperor's qi would be far away in the future. To accelerate the nurturing of the emperor's qi and allow the empress to be liberated sooner, the only way was to greatly increase the faith of the people in the counties. Once the faith of the people had stabilized, internal factors alone wouldn't be able to stimulate the people. At this time, some external stimulation would be needed. For example, subduing the Yao Kingdom and the Ghost Realm, eliminating the Demon Sect, or unifying the Zhou province. These things could greatly stimulate the people of the Great Zhou and make their support for the Empress reach a peak. Naturally, there was no need to worry about the faith of the people. However, none of these things were easy to accomplish. On the contrary, it was easy to waste all the previous efforts. Once the Yao Kingdom or the Ghost Realm invaded, or the Demon Sect wreaked havoc in the counties, causing the Great Zhou to be in turmoil, all the efforts he and the Empress had put in over the past year would be wasted. Of course, the Great Zhou could still keep these forces in check at the moment. The only trouble was the southern countries. For a long time, the southern countries were vassals of the Great Zhou. Every year, they paid tribute. The Great Zhou provided protection for them. At that time, the Great Zhou was undoubtedly the overlord of the Zhou continent. However, the success of two incapable emperors caused the Great Zhou's national strength to rapidly decline within a few decades. It also caused the vassal countries in the south to have disloyalty. In these few decades, the tributes from the various countries went from once a year to once every 2 years, once every 3 years, and once every 5 years until the end of the previous emperor's reign. Now the Shao royal family had even lost control of the Great Zhou. Such a large empire had fallen into the hands of a woman. The thoughts of the various countries became more active. This time, the ambassadors of the various countries took advantage of the tributes and gathered in Chengdu. They had already communicated with each other. It seemed that they had reached some kind of tacit agreement to completely break away from the Great Zhou and cancel the tributes. Although this didn't cause any substantial losses to the Great Zhou, it was a huge blow to the hearts of the people. The Great Zhou used to be the celestial empire. The surrounding countries all submitted to it. If the various countries broke away from the Great Zhou while the Empress was on the throne, it would be a great sin that the Empress couldn't make up for with any achievements. Although this was a mess left behind by the previous 2 emperors of the Great Zhou, they were already dead. The people would only blame the Empress. Li Mu pondered for a moment. He looked at Mr. Mei and asked, "Is it true that the various countries want to break away from the Great Zhou?" Speaking of this, Mr. Mei's expression became serious. He nodded and said, "It is true. In these few decades, the various countries have become more and more dissatisfied with the Great Zhou. The last time the various countries paid tribute, because of the previous emperor's incompetence, caused the imperial court to lose face in front of the ambassadors of the various countries. It also caused them to become disloyal. In these 5 years, from the passing of the previous emperor, to the Zhou family seizing the emperor's qi, and the ascension of the empress, the Great Zhou has been in turmoil. Their ambitions can't be hidden anymore." Li Mu said calmly. "This is normal. Who wants to be a vassal of others forever? To them, they probably want the Great Zhou to be destroyed. They want to take advantage of the chaos to carve up the Great Zhou." Mr. Mei said angrily. "A bunch of immature wolves. They probably forgot who helped them defend against the enemies of Yanzhou and Changzhou. Without the Great Zhou, they would have been swallowed up by others long ago. Not even dregs are left." Li Mu shook his head and said, "Calm down. Times have changed. It is no longer the time of the previous emperor. Even if they really have disloyalty, I'm afraid they don't have the guts." Honglu Temple. The residence of the various countries' ambassadors. In a courtyard, a middle-aged man in a long robe and a young man beside him stood quietly in the courtyard. Their gazes were looking in the direction of the imperial palace. Their eyes shone with a golden light. At the end of their line of sight, a certain part of the sky was shining with golden light. It didn't take long for the golden light in their eyes to disappear. That part of the sky also returned to its original color. The young man asked doubtfully, "Didn't Sir say that the Great Zhou's destiny has come to an end, and that the common people are disloyal to the court? Why is there still so much psychokinesis in the Great Zhou ancestral temple?" The middle-aged man said in a deep voice, "The Great Zhou of today is no longer the Great Zhou of the past. I originally thought that the Great Zhou replacing the Shao family was the last bit of destiny for the Great Zhou. I didn't expect that in just 5 years, no, in just 1 year, the Great Zhou would return to its 100-year-old peak. the young man asked. Then do we still want to leave the Great Zhou? The middle-aged man said softly, let's wait and see first. A strange light flashed in his eyes. He said meaningfully, Li Mu. A rueful look appeared in the young man's eyes. He said, that Li Mu is truly formidable. He actually has the ability to change the destiny of a country. If my great Yong also had such a character, the national strength would definitely be even more prosperous. In 100 years, we might be able to unify the ancestral province. In the Changel Palace, the corners of Zhou Yi's mouth curled up. He said disdainfully, in your dreams? Li Mu, who was in the middle of painting, raised his head. He asked doubtfully, what did your Imperial Majesty just say? Zhou Yi's expression returned to normal. He said, nothing. Continue painting. Don't get distracted. Chapter 429. In the Changel Palace, Li Mu was painting seriously. These days, he gradually felt that it was not a bad thing that the painters in the palace were not willing to teach him. The Empress's attainments in painting were extremely high, and when she taught him, she was gentle and responsible. In just 2 days, Li Mu had already forgotten all about being a court painter, and was wholeheartedly focused on learning from the Empress. Zhou Yi stood beside Li Mu. As she looked, she said, in painting there is no need to stick to the appearance. You have to use the appearance to write the spirit. You have to search for the feeling between resemblance and non-resemblance. Li Mu carefully pondered her words. After a while, the Empress sat back on the dragon throne and said softly, later today, the imperial court will invite the ambassadors of the various countries to a banquet in the Chaoyang Hall. You will go with the officials of the Secretariat. Great Zhou was the sovereign state. Every time they paid tribute, they would invite the ambassadors of the various countries. At that time, besides the important officials of the imperial court, the Empress would also attend. After finishing this painting, Li Mu went to the Secretariat. Today's banquet was only for officials of the 4th rank and above. In the Secretariat, only the head of the Secretariat and 2 assistant ministers were qualified. Li Mu had just returned to the duty room when Louis walked in and asked, will Lord Li also attend today's banquet? Li Mu nodded and said, Her Majesty has asked me to go with the officials of the Secretariat. Although Li Mu's rank was not high enough, it was within Lu Yi's expectations that he would go. He smiled and said, in that case, I will call Lord Li again later. There was still some time before the banquet, so Li Mu had nothing to do. He stretched out his hand. With a flash of white light, the art saint's brush appeared in his hand. He gripped the brush and attempted to draw a few strokes in the void, yet nothing was left behind. Li Mu had the Empress try before, and she was also unable to use the ultimate art of creating something from nothing of the painting path. It was fine if Li Mu couldn't do it, but even the Empress couldn't. Li Mu had reason to suspect that this technique was the same as Dao techniques and mystical powers. It should also require a chant or an incantation. Unfortunately, the tomb of the art saint was very simple. Other than this brush and a few authentic works, there was nothing else. On the Dao of painting, Li Mu encountered the same predicament as Xiaobai. They both lacked cultivation dermic formulations. Xiaobai's predicament was easy to resolve. The white fox race was still a large fey race, but the Dao of painting had not appeared for a long time. At present, the only thing Li Mu could do was to learn painting from the Empress and wait for the right opportunity. Half an hour later, Li Mu, Lu Yi, and the others walked towards the Chaoyang Hall. This hall was to the left of the Crepe Myrtle Hall. During the time of the previous emperor, he often held banquets for officials and clans. Walking into the Chaoyang Hall, Li Mu walked to his seat and sat down looking across. At this banquet, the officials of the Great Zhou sat on the left, and the ambassadors of the various countries sat on the right. Across from Li Mu were the ambassadors of the various countries. There were more than 10 small countries in the southeast and southwest of Zhou province. The combined area of these small countries was only half the size of Great Zhou. In these 100 years, they were all vassals of Great Zhou. They paid tribute to Great Zhou, and Great Zhou provided them with protection. Other than this relationship, Great Zhou would not interfere with their internal affairs. Among these countries, Liang, Yu, Jiang, Jing, Shun, and Yong were the most powerful. Among the 6 Taoist sects, other than the Fulu school and Xuanzong, which were located in Great Zhou, the other 4 sects were located in Liang, Yu, Jiang, and Jing. Relying on these 4 sects, these 4 countries had considerable influence in the south. Although Shin did not have a Taoist sect, it was the birthplace of Buddhism. Among the various countries, it had the largest area and the largest population. Its strength could not be underestimated. In the past, Shin was a formidable rival of Great Zhou. When Great Zhou was first established, Shin took advantage of the Great Zhou's instability to provoke Great Zhou. Taizu sent troops to attack Shin's capital. If it were not for Great Zhou's policy of peace, Shin would have long been erased from the Zhou continent. Since then, Shin Guo had been completely well-behaved. For a long time, Shin had the ambition to become the overlord of the Zhou continent. However, due to the existence of Great Zhou, they could only settle for second place. Even so, they never extinguished their desire to dominate. Although Yong did not have any powerful sects, Yong's imperial family was extremely powerful. They had more than one expert of the upper realm, far surpassing the Great Zhou Xiao clan. What was even rarer was that as Great Zhou's emperors grew more and more muddle-headed with each generation, Yong produced 5 generations of wise emperors. They worked hard for 100 years, sweeping away all obstacles within the country, and completing the peaceful unification of the country. During these 100 years, Yong's national strength steadily increased. In Zhuzhou, it was the 3rd most powerful country, second only to Great Zhou and Shun. In the beginning, the other countries were very submissive to Great Zhou, practically kneeling and begging. They wanted to use their tributes in exchange for Great Zhou's protection. Without Great Zhou, they would have to face enemies from other continents. However, following the decline of Great Zhou, their thoughts naturally changed. They began to look forward to Great Zhou's destruction and its replacement as the new overlord of the Zhou continent. However, the previous emperor's muddle-headedness had caused Great Zhou to sink into a quagmire. Coincidentally, the Great Zhou had rebelled and seized power, causing Great Zhou to become even more chaotic. The other countries' thoughts were bound to become even more active. This tribute had to intimidate these people enough. Otherwise, Great Zhou would lose its right to speak on the Zhou continent, and its prestige as a great country. While Li Mu was observing the various countries' envoys, a man seated across from him, wearing clothes different from those of Great Zhou, called over the eunuch behind him and asked in a low voice, "Who is Lord Li Mu of your esteemed country?" The eunuch looked across, his gaze searching. Replying to the envoy, "Starting from the table directly across from you, the 3rd person on the left is Lord Li Mu." The man, as well as the several people at the 2 tables beside him, looked over at the same time, their hearts trembling. "He's that Li Mu. He's so young. Great Zhou has changed too much in the past few years. This person is so young, but his methods are so powerful." Everyone had been in Luoyang for several days and was no stranger to Li Mu's name. On the first day they arrived in Luoyang, they had heard of his name in the ears of the common people. At first, they were curious, but after some investigation, they were only left with shock. Abolishing the criminal substitution law, reforming the recruitment of officials, cleaning up the academy's court, attacking the old and new parties, and taking back power to the Empress of Great Zhou. Everything he did was earth-shattering. Who didn't know about the criminal substitution law of Great Zhou? This law separated the common people from the nobles. Although it was convenient for the nobles and officials, it was a nightmare for the poor common people. Ever since this law was promulgated, the faith of the people of Great Zhou decreased year by year. The various countries saw this and were happy in their hearts. The emperor of Great Zhou was so muddle-headed, and the court was so decadent. It would be best if the various counties of Great Zhou rose up in revolt and rebelled against the court. This would also give them an opportunity to take advantage of and divide up Great Zhou. From then on, they would no longer have to submit to others. However, in the past 5 years, this law had been abolished. Li Mu had also used a few cases to trick the previous emperor into giving away the death exemption golden medallion. From then on, the nobles who broke the law would be punished the same as the common people. After these things, the people of Great Zhou began to unite again. In addition, Li Mu had also proposed the imperial examination, breaking the academy's dictatorship. He had recruited talents from the local areas, and once again united the people's hearts. This was far from enough. In the past few years, the court of Great Zhou had been firmly controlled by the old and new parties. It had been in a state of internal friction. However, in the past 2 years, it had been attacked by Li Mu at the same time, greatly strengthening the centralization of power of the Empress of Great Zhou. In the past 5 years, earth-shattering things had happened in Great Zhou. Outsiders had seized power, and the country had changed owners. The various countries thought that the opportunity they had been waiting for 100 years had come. They were about to take advantage of this tribute to renegotiate terms with the Great Zhou. However, after arriving at Luoyang, everything here made them dumbfounded. There were no common people living in the abyss of suffering, nor was there an imperial court that was about to collapse. Great Zhou was still the powerful Great Zhou. They cleaned up the Great Zhou internally and reformed the evil laws. They were also extremely strong externally. Even the powerful demon path had suffered a lot at their hands. They were silent for a while, and this completely disrupted their plans. And all of this was because of the man opposite them. He had saved a building from collapse. He was deeply trusted by the people of Great Zhou. He was the most favored official of the Empress of Great Zhou. He was Li Mu of the Secretariat. In the eyes of the crowd, there was pity, admiration, and resentment. They regretted that they had lost the opportunity they had waited so long for. They admired Li Mu's actions. Putting aside their standpoints, what he had done was worthy of everyone's admiration. It was normal for them to feel resentment. Because of this person's existence, their many years of anticipation had gone up in smoke. How could they not hate him? Soon, the expressions of the 2 envoys from the Shen nation, who had hidden resentment in their eyes, changed. Their emotions and strength were actually being sucked away by someone through the air. The 2 of them immediately guarded their hearts and minds, and only then did they manage to guard the power of their emotions. In the great hall, several gazes swept over Li Mu. The calm secretary of the Secretariat revealed a meaningful smile on his face. Li Mu tilted his head slightly and asked Lu Yi, who was beside him, "Lord Lu, which country are the 2 people wearing hats opposite us from?" Lu Yi looked up and said, "They are the envoys from the Shen nation." Li Mu understood and said, "As expected, they are from the Shen nation." Among the countries in the Zhou continent, the Shen nation was the one that refused to accept the Great Zhou the most. For a long time, the Shen nation regarded itself as the overlord of the Zhou continent. Their self-confidence was extremely inflated. They wanted to bully the Great Zhou that had just been established, and its foundation was not very stable. Instead, they were attacked by the Great Zhou near their capital, and were almost destroyed. Only then did they become well-behaved and pay tribute every year to show their allegiance. In these years, although the Shen nation had not developed much, the Great Zhou had been declining. If one were to say who in the Zhou continent wanted the Great Zhou to collapse and disappear, it would undoubtedly be the Shen nation. Lu Yi's mouth twitched and said, "The Shen nation has always wanted to see us make a fool of ourselves. This time, I'm afraid they will be disappointed." The Shen nation's envoy had suffered a hidden loss at the hands of Li Mu, but he did not dare to act up. After glaring angrily at Li Mu, he looked away. As the banquet began, the gazes on Li Mu gradually decreased. However, Li Mu noticed that a gaze diagonally to his left was always on him. Li Mu followed the gaze and saw a young man hurriedly look away. Li Mu casually asked Lu Yi, "Which country is that young man from?" Lu Yi looked and said, "He should be from the Yong kingdom." The Yong kingdom was not large, but its strength was not weak. This was especially true for the Yong royal family, which was the most powerful in the Zhou continent. In terms of the number of experts in the upper realm, the Yong kingdom was comparable to the 6 schools and 4 sects. The Yong kingdom had produced 5 wise rulers in succession, and could be considered a legend in the Zhou continent. Li Mu's gaze swept past the young man, and looked at the middle-aged man beside him. The man's aura was concealed and not a trace was leaked. He looked like a mortal who had never cultivated. However, the Yong kingdom would not send a mortal. Even if his cultivation had not reached the 7th realm, it should be very close. Li Mu's gaze quickly returned to the young man. It was not because he was handsome, but because although he was no longer looking at Li Mu, he had begun to steal glances at the Empress. From time to time, his gaze would glance at the curtains in front of him. When he noticed that Li Mu was looking at him, he immediately lowered his head and focused on the food on the table in front of him. The young man discovered that every time he tried to steal a glance at the legendary figure of the Zhu continent behind the curtains, a gaze would fall on him. After a few times, he no longer dared to steal another glance. The atmosphere at the banquet was exceptionally harmonious. None of the envoys from the various countries proposed to leave the Great Zhou and stop paying tribute. They had already reached an agreement on this matter. However, what they had seen and heard in the Great Zhou over the past few days forced them to be cautious. When the banquet was about to end, Mr. Mei walked in from outside and hurried behind the curtains. He seemed to have something urgent to attend to. Li Mu noticed that an envoy from the Shen Kingdom sitting opposite him seemed to have received some kind of message. His expression slowly darkened. He left his seat and walked to the center of the hall. In a deep voice he said, "Your Majesty, I have just learned that a citizen of my country has been killed in your country. You must give us a satisfactory explanation for this matter. Otherwise, the Shen Kingdom will no longer pay tribute to the Great Zhou Empire." When the courtiers in the hall heard this, they were immediately in an uproar. Even if it was an ordinary case of murder, they could not afford to be careless. At a critical juncture when the various countries were paying tribute, a citizen of another country had been killed in the Great Zhou. The impact would be even worse. If they were not careful, it would incite conflict between countries. This was especially so when the Shen Kingdom was already disloyal. They could use this as an excuse. Mr. Mei walked out from behind the curtains and said, "Your Majesty, please move to the Ziwei Palace and order the Ministry of Justice to immediately bring the people involved in this case to the palace." Assistant Minister Yang of the Ministry of Justice stood out and said respectfully, "Yes, Your Majesty." After that, he strode out of the hall and quickly walked out of the palace. Ministry of Justice. A group of people gathered outside the Ministry of Justice and discussed animatedly. That citizen of the Shen Kingdom clearly fell on his own and hit the stone steps. He can't blame anyone else. But if that young man didn't chase after him, he wouldn't have fallen. Nonsense. If he didn't steal, would others chase after him? But he's dead in the end, and he's from another country. I'm afraid that young man will have to pay with his life. Within the Ministry of Justice, Assistant Minister Yang looked at Wei Peng and sighed. He said, "The envoy of the Shen Kingdom is using this opportunity to make a statement. If this matter isn't handled well, I'm afraid that something big will happen. Where's that criminal? I have to bring him to the palace." Wei Peng nodded and said, "He's in the prison. I'll go get him." He walked into the prison of the Ministry of Justice and opened a cell door. He said to a pale-faced young man, "Let's go. I'm afraid this is your only chance to enter the palace in your life." The young man's face was filled with despair. He said in a trembling voice, "Sir, I don't want to die yet." Wei Peng glanced at him and asked, "Why do you want to die?" The young man's body trembled. He said with infinite regret, "If I didn't chase after him, he wouldn't have died." Wei Peng asked in return, "You were just in a hurry. When did you chase after him?" But in the past 50 years, with the decline of Great Zhou's national power, the intervals between tributes from other countries gradually increased, and the tributes gradually decreased. The actions of foreigners in Great Zhou also became more and more unbridled. By the time of the previous emperor, Great Zhou had completely lost the spirit of a great country. Furthermore, in order to rope in these small countries and prevent them from leaving the Great Zhou while he was in power, the previous emperor even gave them a lot of preferential treatment. From the beginning, merchants from other countries were exempted from all taxes in the Great Zhou, to indulging them in breaking the law and even committing crimes within the Great Zhou's borders. The law of Great Zhou could govern the citizens of Great Zhou, but it couldn't govern the citizens of other countries. This caused the previous emperor's reign to be the most aggrieved period for the citizens and officials of Great Zhou. This aggrieved feeling reached its peak 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the last time the various countries paid tribute, a merchant from the Shen nation raped a woman in the divine capital and was injured by a righteous man. The Shen nation diplomatic mission flew into a rage and threatened that if Great Zhou didn't give them a satisfactory explanation, they would sever their tributes with Great Zhou. In order to maintain stability, the previous emperor publicly executed that righteous man, but released the criminal from the Shen nation. This became the most humiliating diplomatic incident in the history of Great Zhou. It forcefully broke the backbone of the citizens of Great Zhou, causing the citizens of other countries, especially those from the Shen nation, to act recklessly in Great Zhou. However, the citizens of Great Zhou didn't dare to voice their anger. 5 years later, this scene repeated itself once again. Perhaps Shenghua had done it on purpose. In the Crepe Myrtle Palace, the Shen nation diplomatic mission said with a cold expression, "A citizen of my Shen nation died in your Great Zhou. The Great Zhou court must severely punish the murderer and give us an explanation." At this moment, under the gazes of the people in the imperial court, a figure slowly stepped forward. Wei Peng looked at the Shen nation diplomatic mission and asked, "Murderer? What murderer?" The Shen nation diplomatic mission said, "Of course it's the murderer who caused the deaths of our citizens." Wei Peng shook his head and said, "A merchant from your country committed a theft in the Great Zhou's divine capital. When he was escaping, he accidentally fell and hit the stairs and died. What does this have to do with others? How can there be a murderer?" The Shen nation diplomatic mission said coldly, "Who are you? What does this have to do with this case?" Wei Peng said indifferently, "I am the head of the Ministry of Justice, Wei Peng." Is this the attitude of the Great Zhou? After a short silence, a majestic voice finally came from behind the curtain at the front of the hall. "The people of the Shen nation stole first and accidentally fell to their deaths while escaping. They brought this upon themselves and cannot blame others. There is no need to discuss this further." The Empress's voice echoed in the hall. In the end, she only left 2 words, "Court dismissed." The Empress's words undoubtedly determined the nature of this case. After the court was dismissed, the officials of the Great Zhou walked out of the Crepe Myrtle Hall and couldn't help but straighten their backs. Although the Great Zhou had been the most powerful country on the Zhou continent for the past 100 years, it had been a long time since they had straightened their backs in front of the envoys of these small countries. At this moment, there was only one thought in the minds of the many officials. The Empress was mighty. The envoys of the various countries walked out behind the Great Zhou officials with different expressions on their faces. It had also been a long time since they had seen such a powerful Great Zhou. The Empress of the Great Zhou did not give any face to the Shen nation. She did not even search the soul of the Great Zhou citizen, and directly ended the case. She was not afraid of the threats of the Shen nation diplomatic mission, and did not give them a chance. They had once thought that the Great Zhou's national fortune had declined and would not last long after a woman ascended to the throne, reversing yin and yang and reversing the universe. No one had expected the Empress of the Great Zhou to be so powerful. They once again felt the aura of the ruler of the Zhou continent from her. The Shen nation diplomatic mission left without a word. It was not until this moment that they realized that the Great Zhou of today was no longer the Great Zhou of 5 years ago. The man from the Yong kingdom breathed a sigh of relief and said, 5 years ago, the people of the Great Zhou were cold and heartless. They did not help the elderly on the road, and they did not stand up for injustice. I once saw with my own eyes that the people of the Shen nation dragged a woman from the Great Zhou into a dark alley. The onlookers ignored them. I did not expect that 5 years later, a frail scholar would have the courage to step forward. The times have truly changed. The seriously ill lion of the Great Zhou has once again stood up. The young man beside him took a deep breath. The dignified voice of the Empress of the Great Zhou still echoed in his ears. He raised his head and resolutely said, "There will be a day when I will also become that kind of person." After the envoys of the various countries returned to the Chamberlain of Dependencies, they closed their doors and did not leave. This trip to the Great Zhou was full of surprises. They needed to plan carefully. Li Mu did not go to the Changle Palace. Instead, he walked out of the imperial palace with the other officials. Outside the imperial palace, there were already many commoners waiting to see what was going on. They did not dare to approach the other officials. When they saw Li Mu come out, they immediately surrounded him, all of them talking at once. Officially, how was it? How did Her Imperial Majesty decide? Will that righteous man pay with his life? Li Mu looked at their earnest gazes and smiled. It's been so long. You all still don't understand Her Imperial Majesty's temperament. How could she allow us, the people of the Great Zhou, to be bullied by outsiders on our doorstep? Her Imperial Majesty has already said that the people of the Shun nation apologized first. They only have themselves to blame and deserve to die. It has nothing to do with others. That righteous and courageous young man has already been acquitted, and will leave the imperial palace in a moment. The commoners around him all cheered and jumped for joy when they heard this. That's great. Her Imperial Majesty is mighty. There were also some commoners who thought further, and asked Li Mu worriedly. Officially, if the people of the Shin nation use this as an excuse to stop paying tribute to the Great Zhou, what should we do? Li Mu said calmly. They can choose to pay tribute or not. If they don't pay tribute, would our Great Zhou not be the largest country in the Zhou continent? Great Zhou has vast lands and abundant resources. Do we lack their tributes? The commoners were stunned for a moment. After thinking about it, they quickly came to their senses. Officially is right. Our Great Zhou has vast lands and abundant resources. Do we need their tributes? They can ride on our heads and ride roughshod over us. We don't need such tributes. If we take their tributes, we have to be bullied by them. We don't need their tributes. They can pay whoever they want. In order to record him well in the history books, and to prevent the other countries from breaking away from the Great Zhou, the former emperor tolerated the other countries. God knows how much the people of Shindu suffered, and how much suffering they suffered. When the merchants of other countries bullied the people of Shindu, the commoners dared not speak up. When the people of Shun raped women, the former emperor, who was muddle-headed, actually executed the righteous people who saw injustice. Great Zhou was a great country. As the people of Great Zhou, they could have been proud and arrogant. However, under the former emperor's muddle-headed policies, the commoners of Shindu were inferior to the people of other countries. The commoners had long had enough of this. Li Mu originally wanted to keep the tributes from the other countries. After all, it was the symbol of Great Zhou as the most powerful country in the Celestial Empire. After this incident, he had changed his mind. It was better not to ask for tributes. Everyone in the court knew that Lord Li and the Empress wore the same pants. It was not excessive to respect him as much as the Empress. Moreover, in his lifetime he still wanted to rely on Li Mu to get promoted and move to a bigger residence, at the palace gates. The commoners had already dispersed. Li Mu's words were still echoing in their minds. The news spread from 1 to 10, and from 10 to 100. It wouldn't be long before everyone in the fairy's capital knew what he had said. Not long after, in a restaurant. It was lunchtime. The restaurant's business was good, and there were no empty seats. At some point, a few dark-skinned men wearing strange clothes walked into the restaurant. They glanced at the customers who were eating in the restaurant. One of them walked up to the counter and said to the manager in bad Great Zhou language, "We are from the Shin dynasty. Ask the rest of the people here to go out and arrange a good private room. We will serve all the dishes you have here." The manager of the restaurant had just heard Lord Li's words at the palace gates. He was overwhelmed with excitement. He glanced at the men and said coldly, "I've only heard of the Great Zhou. I've never heard of the Shin dynasty. Which barbarian country are you from? There is a seat in the corner over there. If you can sit, then sit. If you can't, then leave. Don't disturb our business here." The Shin dynasty merchant was used to running amok in the Great Zhou. This time, he brought his friends with him. He did not expect the lowly commoners of the Great Zhou to be so impudent to him. His face instantly darkened. He said sternly, "How dare you? Do you know who you are talking to?" Bang. "You want to stir up trouble?" The manager slammed the abacus on the table and sneered, "Fellows, report this to the authorities." inside the Chamberlain of Dependencies. In the courtyard where the young envoy resided, a middle-aged man stood on the roof, overlooking the entire divine capital. A strange light flashed in his eyes. The divine capital of the Great Zhou, which was surging with psychokinesis, shone with a golden light in his eyes. Chapter 432. It wasn't that the envoys from the small countries were spineless, but that they were truly frightened. It was one thing for Earth-rank Fulu to bombard indiscriminately, and it wasn't a big deal for unheard-of Pildow attacks. It was possible to find flaws in a joint attack formation, but who had ever seen a wall covered with heaven-rank Fulu just for people to admire? That was a precious heaven-rank Fulu, not some cabbage. Before coming to the Great Zhou, they had come to the conclusion that the Great Zhou was going to fall. After visiting the Great Zhou's Department of Offerings, they deeply realized that the Great Zhou was the absolute king of the Zhou continent. They began to panic. Not long after Li Mu returned to the palace, the Ministry of Rites sent over a report. Just now, after the envoys from the small countries finished visiting the Department of Offerings, they immediately sent the list of tributes to the Ministry of Rites. These small countries were different from the other 6 countries. No matter how much the Great Zhou declined, it wasn't something they could contend against. The reason they didn't immediately offer tributes was because they were observing the other countries. After witnessing the power of the Great Zhou with their own eyes, they all put away their hesitation. In the Chamberlain of Dependencies, the envoys from the other countries gathered together, their hearts particularly complicated. The envoy from Liang sighed deeply and said, I originally thought that the invasion of the Great Zhou was the beginning of its decline. I didn't expect that this would be their chance to rise again. The envoy from Yu said helplessly, The Great Zhou is indeed the Great Zhou. Fortunately, we made sufficient preparations. Otherwise, it's very likely that we would have fallen to the same fate as the Shen Kingdom. After some hesitation, the envoys from Jiang and Jing also spoke up. The tributes cannot be cut off. Not only must they not be cut off, but they must be restored to their former state. We must satisfy the Great Zhou. Only an hour later, Li Mu received another message. Liang, Yu Jing, Jiang, and Yong had also sent a list of tributes to the Ministry of Rites. They indicated that this was only the first batch of tributes, and that the second batch would arrive within half a year. In the Changle Palace, the Empress, who was reading a book while reclining on her dragon throne, snorted coldly and said, Have the Ministry of Rites send the items back. The Great Zhou does not lack this bit of tribute, nor do we need them to pay tribute. Li Mu hurriedly said, Your Majesty, please reconsider. Please reconsider. Do you still want to grow flowers and plants as soon as possible? Although Zhou Yi disdained to pay attention to the capricious people of the other countries, what Li Mu said was what she cared about the most. Accepting tributes from the other countries was good for rallying the people's hearts. She picked up the book again and waved her hand. Forget it, I don't care anymore. You decide. Li Mu said. Then I will accept their tributes on behalf of your Majesty. Although the tributes from the other countries didn't make much of a difference to the national treasury, it made a big difference to the people of the Great Zhou, who didn't want their motherland to be strong. Accepting tributes from the other countries could strengthen the cohesion of the people, increase the happiness of the people, and increase their psychokinesis and speed up the condensation of imperial qi. If the Empress wanted to retire from her position as Empress soon, and spend her old age with Li Mu, it was best not to be willful. Li Mu had just finished drafting the edict when Mr. Mei walked in and said, Your Majesty, an envoy from the Yong Kingdom is outside the palace, requesting an audience. Zhou Yi put down her book and sat up from her dragon throne. What is the Yong Kingdom doing here? She asked. Mr. Mei shook his head. I don't know. Does your Majesty wish to see them? Zhou thought for a moment, then said, "Have them wait outside the imperial study." The Changle Palace was her sleeping quarters. She generally didn't receive foreign officials here. Zhou stood up, glanced at Li Mu and said, "Come with us." Among the 6 countries, the Yong Kingdom wasn't the strongest, but it had the most prospects. The 4 countries of Liang, Yu, Jiang, and Jing relied on the support of the 4 Taoist sections. Without the 4 Taoist sects, the Yong Kingdom would immediately be reduced to a low-tier country. The Shen Kingdom was the birthplace of Buddhism. It wasn't small and had a large population. However, there were too many internal problems, and the quality of the people was generally low. The Great Zhou had once thought the Shen Kingdom to be very powerful, but after fighting it once, they discovered that the Shen Kingdom was only strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Only the Yong Kingdom's strength was truly powerful. Disregarding everything else, a country with less than a tenth of the Great Zhou's population had condensed 3 strands of Emperor's Qi within 50 years, creating 3 transcending mortality experts for the Yong Kingdom. The Great Zhou had 10 times the population of the Yong Kingdom, and was known as the strongest country on the Zhu continent. Yet, in the same amount of time, it had barely managed to condense 1 strand of Emperor's Qi. Just based on this, the Great Zhou's previous emperor and the previous emperor would be ashamed even if they were lying in their coffins. It wasn't hard to guess how condensed the Yong Kingdom's people's Qi was. A single country had produced 5 generations of wise emperors. If he hadn't transmigrated, it wasn't impossible for the Yong Kingdom to defeat the Great Zhou and unify the Zhu continent several decades later. The imperial study. It depicted an extremely handsome man, about as handsome as Li Mu. When he looked again, wasn't the man in the painting himself? After staring blankly for a moment, Li Mu seemed to have thought of something. Turning around, he stared at the young man and asked in an unfriendly tone, "Why did you draw this official's portrait? Are you planning to find an assassin to assassinate this official after returning to your country?" If not for Li Mu, the other countries would have been able to laugh at the ridiculousness of the Great Zhou, especially Great Yong. In the future, Great Yong would have the possibility of unifying the Zhu continent. If one had to say who they hated the most, it would naturally be him. The Yong Kingdom's envoy had drawn his portrait for no apparent reason. Li Mu had enough reason to suspect that this person harbored evil intentions. Hearing his words, the young man became even more flustered. Promptly shaking his head, he said, No, I drew it casually." "Casually drew it?" Li Mu glanced at the painting again. The painting had both form and spirit, and it was extremely lifelike. In particular, the expression in the eyes was no different from that of a real person. It gave one the impression that the person in the painting would walk out of the painting at any moment. If this was called a casual drawing, then what were Li Mu's recent paintings called? At this moment, Li Mu felt that he had been insulted. Out of the protection of our Great Zhou's merchants and local taxes, the officials of the Ministry of Revenue do not agree to the mutual reduction of tariffs between the 2 countries. The young Yong envoy argued. This humble one believes otherwise. The mutual reduction of tariffs will make goods cheaper. This will be beneficial to the common people, as it will allow them to buy what they need at a lower price. Although this will intensify the competition between merchants to a certain extent, an appropriate amount of competition is beneficial to the development of commerce. This will benefit the people of both countries. If tariffs are reduced, it will inevitably attract even more merchants, and local taxes will only increase, not decrease, Li Mu regretfully said. This official has no choice but to admit that your noble country's proposal is very good. This official also fully approves of it. However, this official's words carry little weight. I cannot oppose the entire Ministry of Revenue, unless... The youth's eyes brightened. He asked, "Unless what?" Li Mu replied, "Unless someone can convince His Imperial Majesty. If His Imperial Majesty agrees, then the Ministry of Revenue's opinion will not be important." The youth stood up and bowed to Li Mu. He earnestly said, "This is a matter beneficial to the people of Great Zhou. Darren Li is deeply loved and respected by the common people. I ask that Darren Li consider the common people of both countries and facilitate cooperation between the two countries. Li Mu sighed. Although this official shares your thoughts, I cannot disregard the opinions of the entire Ministry of Revenue and speak before His Imperial Majesty. Otherwise, won't this official become a treacherous official who bewitches His Imperial Majesty into making arbitrary decisions? The youth replied, the eyes of the common people are as clear as snow. If Darren Li is a treacherous official, then there will be no loyal officials in the Great Zhou. When he said this, his tone was somewhat complicated. They had actually made 2 preparations for their trip to the Great Zhou. If the Great Zhou was an arrow at the end of its flight, they would break off the tributes and wait for the day when the Great Zhou collapsed. Then, Great Yong would find an opportunity to dominate the Zhou continent. If the Great Zhou was still powerful, they would abandon the first plan and strengthen trade and cooperation with the Great Zhou, vigorously develop the domestic economy, and raise the standard of living of the common people. Li Mu sighed. This official truly wishes to help, but is powerless to do so. The courtiers already have complaints about His Imperial Majesty's favor and trust in this official. If this official opposes the Ministry of Revenue again, who knows what they will say about this official behind my back? Perhaps they will say that this official was bribed by the state of Yong and received benefits from you, harming the interests of the Great Zhou. Speaking on your behalf, isn't this the same as framing this official as being heartless and unjust? He looked at the young envoy and said, for this matter, you will have to personally seek out Her Imperial Majesty. Disappointed, the young man replied, Darren Li is Her Imperial Majesty's most favored subject. If your words are useless, then even if we seek an audience with Her Imperial Majesty, it will be futile. Li Mu did not speak. His face revealed a contemplative expression, as if he was hesitating. A moment later, he looked back at the young envoy and said, this official is fully aware that friendly trade between the two countries is greatly beneficial to both the people of the two countries and the court. Although this official is unable to directly help you due to my status, I can point you in the right direction. The young man's eyes lit up again. Cupping his fist, he said, please advise me, Darren Li. Li Mu looked at him and asked, you should know that Her Imperial Majesty is very interested in painting, right? The young man nodded. I saw it a few days ago. The paintings hanging on the walls of Her Imperial Majesty's study are authentic works by Wu Daoxian. Even when the Empress mentioned the art sage, her tone was respectful. However, this young man from the Yong Kingdom directly called him by his name, not even adding the word sage. Perhaps there really was something to him. Li Mu casually asked, if my guess is correct, you should be cultivating and painting, right? The young man did not deny it. Nodding, he replied, yes. Li Mu unhurriedly said, from what I know, Her Imperial Majesty is very fond of painting. Moreover, she is deeply in love with the art sage's authentic works. For many years, she has been searching for the lost inheritance of painting. If you can fulfill Her Imperial Majesty's wish, then the matter of trade will not be a problem. After saying this, he slowly stood up and said, this official's words end here. I can't say anything more. Think about it yourselves. Finished speaking, he turned and left. The middle-aged man walked out of the room. The young man raised his head to look at him and asked, Royal Uncle, what should we do? The middle-aged man did not answer. Instead, he asked, what do you think? After thinking it over, the young man said, reducing tariffs and opening up trade with Great Zhou is a blessing for the common people of Great Yong. Although painting is an important part of the heavenly tomes, it is not that it cannot be taught to outsiders. Taoist cultivators are all aware of this. In the past thousands of years, they have become even more powerful. It is precisely because the other sects do not teach it to outsiders that they have declined. Chapter 434. Changle Palace. Li Mu handed the letter from the Yong envoy to the Empress. Your Imperial Majesty, the Yong envoy asked this subject to deliver this letter to Your Imperial Majesty. Please take a look, Your Imperial Majesty. Zhou was eating tonghulu and didn't accept the letter. We don't have time right now. Open it yourself and see what's written on it. Li Mu opened the letter and took out a piece of paper. Sweeping his eyes over it, he whispered, as expected. At the top of the paper were the words Painting Sutra, written in large letters, followed by a line of small letters that read, Divine Brushling Ling, opening to Shangqing, Liujiafu Wei, Shisong Luding Ding. I am now a calligraphy seal, concealing my body, meeting gold, meeting fire, fire, hiding in the earth, the heavenly emperor, the sage. This letter contained the formula for the Tao of painting. Only by using this formula could one display the Tao of painting. As expected, the Tao of painting was also a type of Taoist technique. It didn't create objects out of thin air. It was between illusion and reality, yet it was more brilliant than both. It possessed more of a bewitching nature than Taoist techniques, and at the same time, it possessed a power that illusion didn't possess. After pondering for a moment, Li Mu took out his brush and drew a simple rune in the air. This time, a golden rune finally lit up in the air in front of him. In the next moment, the rune transformed into a golden thread that bound Shangguan Li's body. Shangguan Li coldly snorted and puffed out her chest. The golden thread collapsed, but at least it proved that Li Mu's conjecture was correct. By using the Tao of painting in the Fu Lu, ancient talisman techniques could be reproduced. Although the two were fundamentally different, the Tao of painting borrowed the power of heaven and earth. It didn't consume much of one's transcendence energy, and it could last longer in battle. The premise was that one had to simultaneously cultivate both Taoist techniques. Li Mu and the Empress studied for a few years, and would certainly be able to better utilize the Tao of painting in the Fu Lu. With the Yong Kingdom's sincerity, Li Mu ordered the Chamberlain of Dependencies to hold a banquet, and invite the Yong Kingdom's envoys to discuss the details of the friendly relations between the two countries. The countries in Zhou province needed to pay tribute to Great Zhou, but the tariffs between Great Zhou and the other countries were not light. In order to win over the other countries, the former emperor exempted them from the tariffs. It was only after the empress ascended the throne that the tariffs returned to normal. This was the first time in history that the Great Zhou and the state of Yong had established trade cooperation at the national level. After the banquet ended, the Assistant Minister of Revenue walked out of the Chamberlain of Dependencies with a face full of doubt. These 5 heretical cultivation practitioners had used this reason to make use of the Zhejiang County government. Their goal had been that fox demon from the very beginning. There were evil demons who ate the essence, blood, and souls of humans. There were also evil humans who killed demons for their cores. There was also a group of cultivators who did not walk the righteous path. Because they were afraid of the imperial court, they did not dare to attack the common people. Therefore, they targeted demons. Killing people was against the law, but killing demons did not count. Even if the Great Zhou court found out, they would not do anything to them. In Li Mu's eyes, these people were no different from those evil demons. When he was halfway through his meal, the 5 people had already left their table and strode out of the restaurant. Li Mu left a silver ingot and walked out slowly. Not long after, outside the Zhejiang County, a thin man closed his eyes and sensed. He pointed in a direction and said, "The blood curse's reaction is over there. Let's go." As he finished speaking, several figures shot up into the sky and flew forward. At a certain moment, the thin man suddenly stopped and looked back. The other 4 people also stopped and asked, "Big brother, what's wrong?" The middle-aged man looked back and said, "I keep feeling that someone is following us." The other 4 people immediately became alert. They looked around but found nothing. One of them was puzzled and said, "There's nothing. Big brother, are you mistaken?" Another person said, "Even if someone is following us, it's impossible for there not to be any fluctuations of mana. Big brother, are you being too sensitive?" The thin man looked around and said, Maybe I'm thinking too much. Let's go. The 5 people continued forward and quickly disappeared. But after the time it took to drink a cup of tea, they appeared out of thin air. The man who disappeared looked around again and sighed in relief. He said, "Looks like there really isn't anything." One of them smiled and said, "I already said Big Brother is being too sensitive. Let's go quickly. If that fox demon escapes, it will be difficult to find." The 5 people flew away again. On the ground, an invisible figure followed behind them at a leisurely pace. The invisibility spells of Taoism were of little value and could only be used on mortals. In front of cultivators of the same level, they would definitely be exposed. Although invisibility spells could prevent any fluctuations of mana, he could only rely on the strength of his legs. If he used spells to fly or ride on clouds, he would be easily discovered. Fortunately, Limu cultivated to Taoism. His body was far stronger than normal cultivators. Even if he only relied on the strength of his legs, he would not lose sight of him for a while. After only 15 minutes, he sensed a strong fluctuation of mana in front of him. The man pointed at Huanji and said to the small demon, "Little snake, that's Lord Huanji of Meizong. Are you willing to join Meizong and follow Lord Huanji?" The small demon hesitated for a moment and asked softly, "Is there any benefit in joining Meizong?" The man smiled and said, "There are many benefits. In the Meizong sect, you can obtain spiritual jades for cultivation, and also receive guidance from experts. Lord Illusion Princess's father, Lord Illusion Heaven Lord, is a 7th level Xian demon. If you can receive his guidance, maybe you will have the chance to become a great demon in the future." When the small demon heard this, his eyes lit up. He immediately nodded and said, "Then I'm willing." The man patted him on the shoulder and said, "Then let's go." After keeping the small demon, the group flew into the air again. The handsome demon did not have enough spiritual power and was carried by the others. They flew all the way to the demon country in the depths of the 100,000 mountains. The man beside the small demon looked at him and asked, "Little snake, what other relatives do you have in your family? Aren't you going to tell them?" After a while, the small demon was already familiar with them. He said, "My parents were killed by human cultivators long ago. I've always been alone. I don't have any relatives." In the group, another person gritted his teeth and said, "Damn humans. How many demons have died in their hands? They write about demons eating humans all day long. Why don't they write about humans killing demons? Demons killing humans is intolerable. Humans killing demons is enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens." The small demon said, "Not all books are written like that. There's a book called Strange Stories from a Chinese studio. It's written quite well. There are evil people in it, but there are also demons who are affectionate and righteous." The man said, "I know about this book. Lord Huanji likes to read it. She even asked us to find Pu Songling and pay him a visit. Unfortunately, we haven't found him." He shook his head and said, "There aren't many people like Mr. Pu who are sensible. Most of the humans keep saying that the monsters are evil, but what have they done? Killing the monsters, taking their souls, stealing our monster cores, capturing the female monsters of the fox race and the snake race, sealing their cultivation base and providing them with entertainment. It's not just female demons. Many handsome male demons were also captured by them to satisfy the different desires of humans. Little snake, you're just lucky. With your looks, if those humans saw you, they would definitely capture you and make you do that kind of thing with them." The small demon was stunned. Then he said embarrassedly, "There's such a good thing?" The man patted his shoulder and said, "You're thinking too much. If you're lucky, they'll make you accompany those old women." What sect entrance ceremony? You'll know in a while. Hu Jiu led Li Mu all the way and soon entered a spacious courtyard. The courtyard was very large. There were artificial mountains, ponds, grass gardens, and everything else. Huanji stood with her back to the door. Hu Jiu led Li Mu in and bowed. Lord Huanji, I've brought him here. Li Mu also bowed and said, Greetings, Lord Huanji. Huanji turned around, looked at Li Mu, and said lightly, Those who enter my Meizong sect must abide by the rules of Meizong sect and keep the secret of Meizong sect. Those who betray Meizong sect, even if you escape to the ends of the earth, I will personally kill you. You still have the chance to go back on your words. Li Mu pointed to the sky and said, I, Daniel Wu, swear to the heavens that if I betray Meizong sect, let me become a dog. For the Snake Clan, there was nothing more ruthless than this oath. Li Mu learned this from the two sisters, Yin Xian and Ting Xian. Hu Jiu smiled and said, Your Snake Clan still doesn't like the Dog Clan. Li Mu coldly snorted and said, From the moment they pledged allegiance to humans, they were no longer Monster Clan, but our enemies. Huanji crossed her arms and said, Well, as long as you do one more thing, you can become an official disciple of Meizong sect. Li Mu cupped his fists and said, Please instruct me, Lord Huanji. Huanji pointed to a stone statue next to the rockery and said, Slash it with your sword. Although he didn't know what strange rule this was, Li Mu still walked to the stone statue next to the rockery. When he raised his sword, he was stunned for a moment, but it was only for a moment. Then, the sword in his hand fiercely slashed down. Clang! Li Mu's sword slashed the stone statue, leaving a shallow sword mark. He walked back and asked curiously, Why do you want to slash this stone statue? Huanji looked at him indifferently and said, This is not something you should ask. On the way back, Hu Jiu explained to Li Mu, That person is Lord Huanji's enemy. If you meet him in the future, you have to avoid him. Li Mu was confused and asked, Why? If I meet him, shouldn't I kill him to avenge Lord Huanji? Hu Jiu glanced at him and said, Then you have to have the ability to do so. This person's dharma power is very strong. Countless cultivators of the devil's doctrine have died at his hands, including the first elder of the Origin Soul sect, Nether Saint. If you could kill him, you wouldn't be here. Li Mu smiled embarrassedly and asked, What enmity does this person have with Lord Huanji? Why does Lord Huanji hate him so much? Hu Jiu glanced at him and said, Don't ask about Lord Huanji. Li Mu immediately became serious and said, I know. Hu Jiu added, However, if this person happens to fall into your hands in the future, don't kill him. Bring him back and hand him over to Lord Huanji. Is it possible to win him over through the woman beside him? Chapter 438. Li Mu returned to his room unhappily. He didn't expect his reputation to be ruined by the spies of the Meizong sect. What surprised him even more was that the spies of the Meizong sect could find out so many secrets. Xiaobai didn't have any demonic aura on her body. How did they know that she was a fox? The palace gates were closed at night. Li Mu, Wanwan, and Xiaobai lived in the palace. Only a few palace maids near Changle Palace knew that there were people from the Meizong sect among them. Li Mu didn't rush to inform the empress. He just came to Thousand Fox City last night. Perhaps the powerhouses of the Meizong sect didn't have time to notice him, but it might not be the case today. Although he joined the Meizong sect because they invited him, the Meizong sect was too trusting of him. They seemed to trust him, but they might have secretly begun to monitor his every move. The jade talisman that the empress gave him, and the fulu that Li Mu drew to shield himself from the mysteries of heaven, had been put away by him long ago. These things could be used to shield the mysteries of heaven to prevent others from prying. Using them here meant that he didn't want to expose himself fast enough. Even powerhouses above the sixth realm couldn't spy on a small snake demon in human form. Wasn't that just giving away 300 taels of silver? After returning to his room, Li Mu did not do anything superfluous. He sat cross-legged on his bed, took out a piece of spirit jade, held it in his hand, and began to draw qi to cultivate. He sat there until night fell. Just after midnight, The spiritual jade in Li Mu's hand turned into powder. With the strength of a transformed demon, it would take about this long to absorb a spiritual jade. After that, he got out of bed and stretched for a while. He drank a glass of water, and then went to bed again. On the highest mountain in Thousand Fox City, in a cave on the mountain, a man who looked similar to Huanji waved his hand and dispersed the dark light technique. He said, "This demon should be fine." Huanji nodded and said, "Then I'll use it without worry." The man said, "His appearance can be considered outstanding, but it's a pity that he's a demon. It would be great if he was a human. If we need him in the future, we'll have to wash his demon body. How troublesome. They're my people. Don't tell them what to do." Phantom Princess frowned and said, "What about those heretical cultivators?" A trace of killing intent appeared in the man's eyes as he said, "Kill them. How many of our compatriots have died at their hands because they have been humiliated? One day, I will kill all of these damned humans." The next morning, Li Mu learned from Hujio that the 5 human heretical cultivation practitioners had been publicly executed in the Thousand Fox Nation. Human beings hated heretical cultivation, and demons hated heretical cultivation even more than human beings did. Due to the prestige of the Great Zhou court, heretical cultivation was still somewhat afraid of taking the lives of the people of Great Zhou. They were afraid of alarming the Department of Worship, so they didn't dare to wantonly cause harm. But they didn't have to worry about demons. The Great Zhou court wouldn't protect the demons, and the demon nation was a mass of scattered sand. There was nothing to be afraid of. Therefore, a large number of heretical cultivation practitioners hunted and killed demons everywhere. They extracted the souls of low-level demons, seized the inner cores of mid-level demons, and transformed into good-looking demons. Regardless of gender, they were sold to the black market to provide for certain customers with special requirements to visit prostitutes. This had even formed a huge black industry chain. Countless demons suffered from it and hated this kind of heretical cultivation, especially the Fox clan, because after transforming, the males were handsome and the females were beautiful. They were the focus of heretical cultivation. Although the major righteous sects restrained their disciples from doing such inhumane things, they were the same as the court and wouldn't stand up for the demons. When they returned home, Hujio looked seriously at Li Mu and said, "Little snake, you have to remember to stay away from humans. Don't be deceived by their flowery words. Some people like a tender and handsome little demon like you the most." Li Mu shivered and said, "I will be careful. Thank you, Brother Hujio." Hujio patted his shoulder and said, "We're all on the same side. Don't be so polite. By the way, you just entered the Meizong sect and are still too weak to go out with us to carry out missions. Tonight, you will be on guard duty in front of Miss Illusion Princess's courtyard. When dawn comes, someone will come to replace you." Li Mu nodded and said, "I know." It was late at night, and the moonlight was bright. Li Mu stood at the door of Illusion Princess's courtyard with his sword in his hands. He was the second-generation disciple of the Fulu school, the future headmaster, the controller of the Department of Consecration in the Great Zhou, the deputy commander of the internal guards, and the close minister of the Empress. Yet he was guarding the door of a fox demon. Li Mu didn't plan to be like the spies of the Meizong sect and completely forget their identities. He had hidden for 20 years and climbed up step by step without leaving any traces. He felt that 2 months was too long. But now he could only guard the door here. If this went on, when could he reach the top of the Meizong sect, comprehend the heavenly book of the Fox clan and steal the secrets of the Meizong sect? Now he was still a little demon at the bottom of the Meizong sect. Illusion Princess wouldn't even look at him. He had to do something to show his value and attract Illusion Princess's attention. Then he could take the opportunity to climb up. In the courtyard, Illusion Princess slashed the stone statue beside the rockery a few times and then walked back to her room. She sat cross-legged on the bed and stretched out her hand. An ancient book page floated above her palm. She calmed her mind and focused. Soon her consciousness was immersed in it. Outside the courtyard, Li Mu, who was racking his brains to think of a way to climb up, suddenly raised his eyebrows. He sensed an extremely familiar aura from the courtyard behind him. This was the aura of the Heavenly Book. The Heavenly Book of the Lord of Illusions was in the hands of Illusion Princess. At this moment, Li Mu suddenly had a strong impulse to rush in and subdue Illusion Princess, snatch the Heavenly Book and run. But soon he dispelled this idea. Illusion Princess wasn't easy to deal with. He couldn't subdue Illusion Princess in a short time. If thousands of Fox Clan experts arrived, it would be difficult for him to leave. Even if he had the Demon Emperor's cave, if the space was sealed, he would be trapped here and die. After thinking for a long time, Li Mu took a breath and resisted the temptation. In the room, Illusion Princess comprehended the Heavenly Book for the whole night. Outside the courtyard, Li Mu also endured for the whole night. In the past few hours, he had countless thoughts of seizing the Heavenly Book, but he suppressed it countless times. When the sky was bright, Wuxia came over with another little demon and said, "Little snake, you can go back and rest now." Li Mu was about to go back to his room, but when he saw Wuxia and the other two preparing to go out, he asked, "Brother Wuxia, what are you going to do?" Wuxia said, "Before those heretical cultivators died, the Great Elder searched their souls and learned of their nest. Several of our clansmen were captured there. We are going to save them." There was no future in guarding the door. Li Mu was worried that he wouldn't have a chance to show off, so he immediately said, "Brother Wuxia, I'll go too." A person behind Wuxia glanced at Li Mu and said, "Your strength is so low. What can you do? Not only can you not help, but you will also cause trouble." Li Mu said, "My parents died in the hands of these heretical cultivators. I hate heretical cultivation the most. If I follow you, maybe I can meet the murderer who killed my parents. My biggest dream is to avenge my parents with my own hands one day." After hearing Li Mu's justifiable reason, they didn't say anything else. Wuxia thought for a moment and nodded. The task this time is not dangerous. You can come if you want. It won't do you any harm to go through more hardships. Walking on the edge of life and death is good for improving your cultivation. Li Mu made a fist salute and said, "Thank you, Brother Wuxia. I will try my best." Half a month's time quietly passed. Phantom Princess looked away and said, "Let's wait and see." That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.